There are monsters in this world. Some wear crowns. King Draven Kalor ruled an empire built on blood and bone, his throne carved from the bodies of anyone who dared defy him. But the real monster wasn't the man. It was the curse eating him alive from the inside, turning him into something that even death feared to claim. Then she walked into his hall, fearless, defiant. And suddenly, the beast inside him went quiet for the first time in 10 years. This is the story of how one woman's courage broke the most dangerous king alive. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know where my tribe is watching from. The throne room of Varithus stank of fear. Not the clean kind that came quick and left quicker, but the thick, suffocating terror that settled into stone and cloth and skin until it became part of the architecture itself. Draven Kalor sat motionless on his throne, a hulking figure carved from shadows and barely controlled violence, and watched a man beg for his life. The merchant was on his knees, forehead pressed to marble so cold it probably burned. His voice cracked with every word. "Please, your majesty, I have a family, 3 children. My wife is pregnant with our 4th. I only needed more time, just 1 more month." Draven's jaw tightened. The words blurred together into meaningless noise. What he heard instead was the sound of his own heartbeat, too fast, too hard, like war drums counting down to something inevitable. Beneath his skin, something else moved. Something hungry. "How much do you owe?" His voice came out flat, emotionless. He'd learned years ago that emotion was a luxury monsters couldn't afford. 15,000 silver marks, your majesty." The merchant's shoulders shook. "I swear on my children's lives, I'll pay every coin. Just give me—" "You've had 6 months." Draven's fingers curled around the armrest of his throne, and the wood groaned under the pressure. He could feel his nails lengthening, sharpening, the curse responding to the rage he kept locked behind his ribs like a caged animal. 6 months of excuses. 6 months of promises. "Tell me why I shouldn't make an example of you right now." The merchant sobbed. "Please, please, I'll do anything. Anything." Draven let the word hang in the air between them. He'd heard it 1,000 times before. Desperate men always promised anything when death came knocking. They never meant it. They meant something, just not the thing that would actually cost them. Beside him, his advisor, Lord Corwin, shifted his weight. A subtle movement, but Draven caught it. Corwin had been at his side for 15 years, long enough to recognize when the king was losing his grip, long enough to be afraid. "Your Majesty," Corwin's voice was carefully neutral. "Perhaps we could arrange a payment plan. Garnish his wages over the next—" "No." The word cut through the throne room like a blade. Draven rose from his seat, and every person in the hall took an unconscious step backward. At 6'4", he towered over most men, and the black ceremonial armor he wore made him look even larger, even more inhuman. The merchant whimpered. Draven descended the stairs slowly. Each footstep echoed. His vision was already starting to blur at the edges, red creeping in like blood spreading through water. The beast inside him stirred, stretching, testing the bars of its cage. Not now. Not here. Not in front of half the court. He stopped 3 feet from the merchant. This close, he could smell the man's terror. Sweat and piss, and the particular sourness that came from a body convinced it was about to die. Part of him wanted to recoil. The other part, the darker part, wanted to lean into it. Stand up. The merchant scrambled to his feet, swaying. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Your Majesty, your daughter." Draven's eyes narrowed. "How old is she?" The merchant's face went white. "The 13, your Majesty. Why, she'll work in the palace kitchens until your debt is paid." Draven turned away, heading back toward his throne. The movement was deliberate, controlled. If he stopped moving, he'd lose control. If he lost control, everyone in this room would see exactly what kind of monster wore the crown. "Refuse, and I'll have you hanged in the market square before sunset. Your choice." Silence. Then, a choked sound that might have been gratitude or grief or both. "Thank you, your Majesty." "Thank you? I swear she'll work hard. She'll—" "Get out of my sight." The merchant fled. His footsteps clattered across marble, frantic and graceless. Draven sank back into his throne and closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. Beneath his skin, beneath the muscle and bone, something growled. The curse had been eating him alive for 10 years. 10 years of slowly losing pieces of himself to the beast, watching his humanity crack and splinter like ice over deep water. There were nights he didn't remember. Mornings he woke up tasting blood and couldn't recall whose. His physicians called it the Alpha Curse, the price his bloodline paid for the power that had conquered half the known world. They said it couldn't be stopped. Only managed, only survived. Barely. Your Majesty. Corwin's voice was soft, meant for his ears alone. You need to rest. The ceremony is in 3 hours, and if you transform in front of the nobles... I won't. Draven opened his eyes. The red had faded, but barely. The beast was still there, still waiting. I'm fine. You haven't been fine in 5 years. Corwin's expression was grim. The restraints we commissioned from the blacksmith won't hold me if I fully turn. Draven stood abruptly. Nothing holds me, Corwin. That's the problem. He strode from the throne room before his advisor could respond, leaving a wake of bowed heads and averted eyes. No one looked at him directly anymore. They were too afraid of what they might see looking back. Heck, the royal ceremony was a nightmare dressed up as pageantry. Draven stood at the head of the great hall, flanked by his personal guard, and watched the nobles of Varithis file in like vultures circling a carcass. They smiled, they bowed. They kissed his ring and called him Your Majesty, with voices that dripped honey and hid poison. Every single one of them was waiting for him to die. He didn't blame them. He was waiting for it too. The hall itself was a monument to excess. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Columns carved from marble and inlaid with gold. Tapestries depicting his ancestors' conquests, all blood and glory and the kind of violence that looked noble from a distance. At the far end, musicians played something elegant and boring. Servants moved through the crowd with trays of wine and delicacies that cost more than most families earned in a year. Draven hated every second of it. Your Majesty. A woman in emerald silk appeared at his elbow, curtsying so low he could see straight down her dress. She knew it. They always knew it. Lady Morwenna of House Ashford. I wanted to personally congratulate you on another year of glorious rule. The Empire has never been stronger. He didn't remember her name until she said it. There were too many of them, these noble parasites who smiled while they schemed. Morwenna. He nodded once. Your house is well, I trust. Thriving, thanks to your wise governance. Her hand brushed his arm, a touch that lingered half a second too long. Though I must confess, Your Majesty, the court is abuzz with rumors. They say you've been unwell. There it was. The probing question wrapped in silk and concern. Draven's jaw tightened. They say a lot of things. Of course. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, calculating. I only meant that if Your Majesty requires anything, House Ashford is at your service. We have healers, physicians trained in the old ways. I require nothing. His voice dropped to something dangerous, and Morwenna's smile faltered. From your house, or any other? Is that clear? Crystal, Your Majesty. She backed away, the picture of grace, but he saw the flash of anger in her eyes before she turned. Another vulture disappointed. Draven turned away, scanning the crowd. Somewhere in this room was his brother Malric, probably whispering poison into someone's ear. Malric had always been good at that. Where Draven ruled through fear and strength, his younger brother preferred subtlety and manipulation. Two sides of the same blood-soaked coin. He spotted him near the eastern colonnade, surrounded by a cluster of younger nobles who hung on his every word. Malric was handsome in the way Draven had never been. Where Draven was all hard edges and brutality, Malric was charm and calculated warmth. He looked up, caught Draven's eye, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Before Draven could move toward him, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices. The sharp crack of flesh against flesh. The crowd parted like water, and through the gap Draven saw a young servant girl on her hands and knees sobbing. Standing over her was Lord Tybalt Morgan, one of the wealthier nobles, his face twisted with rage. Clumsy little bitch. Tybalt raised his hand again. You've ruined my coat. Do you have any idea what this cost? The girl curled into herself, arms over her head. She couldn't have been more than 16. Blood dripped from her split lip where he'd already hit her once. Draven started forward. Corwin grabbed his arm. Your Majesty, don't! It's not worth— Draven shook him off and cut through the crowd. People scattered out of his way. By the time he reached Tybalt, the noble's hand was already descending for another blow. Draven caught his wrist mid-swing. His grip was iron. Tybalt yelped. Your Majesty, this worthless girl spilled wine on my— I don't care. Draven's voice was perfectly calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. You will apologize to her. Now! Tybalt's face cycled through shock, outrage, and fear in rapid succession. She's a servant, a nobody. She should be grateful I don't have her whipped. Draven's grip tightened. Something cracked. Tybalt screamed, apologize or lose the hand. Your choice. I'm sorry. Tybalt's voice broke. I'm sorry, please, Your Majesty. I'm sorry. Not to me. Draven released him and stepped back. To her. Tybalt turned to the servant girl, cradling his wrist. His face was pale with pain and humiliation. I apologize for striking you. The girl stared at him, then at Draven, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. She didn't speak, just nodded. Draven looked at Tybalt. Get out of my sight. And if I hear you've laid hands on another servant, I'll take more than your hand. Understood. Yes, Your Majesty. Tybalt fled, shoving through the crowd. The hall had gone silent. Every eye was on Draven. He could feel their judgment, their confusion. Kings didn't intervene for servants. Kings didn't care. But something about the girl's terror, the helplessness in her eyes, had triggered something in him. A memory, maybe. Or just the last fraying thread of his humanity trying to hold on. He turned to leave, to escape back to the shadows where he belonged, and that's when he saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She was dressed in deep burgundy, simpler than the other noble ladies, but somehow more striking for it. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and intelligence. And her eyes. God, her eyes. They weren't afraid. They were calculating, measuring him. Their gazes locked, and something in Draven's chest shifted. The beast inside him went still. Not sleeping, but listening. Like a wild animal that had caught an unfamiliar scent and didn't know whether to attack or retreat. Then she did something that stopped his heart. She stepped forward. Through the crowd, through the nobles who parted for her like she was royalty herself, until she stood between him and the servant girl. She sank into a curtsy, graceful but not subservient. Your Majesty. Her voice was clear, steady. I'm Celine Virel of House Virel. I would like to take responsibility for this girl's employment in your palace, if you'll permit it. She's young and inexperienced, but I believe she can be trained. Punishing her for an accident would be a waste of potential. The hall held its breath. Draven stared at her. No one spoke to him like this. No one offered alternatives to his decisions. No one suggested he might be wrong or too harsh or anything other than absolutely right. It was either fear or flattery. Never this. Never someone who looked him in the eye and spoke to him like he was a person instead of a monster. The beast inside him stirred again, but not with hunger, with something else, something he didn't have a name for. You would take responsibility. His voice came out rougher than he intended. For a stranger. Celine's chin lifted slightly. For someone who needs a chance. Yes. And if she fails, if she breaks something valuable, or offends another noble, or proves to be as clumsy as Lord Morgan claims, what then? Then I accept the consequences. Her eyes never left his, whatever they may be. Silence, the kind that screamed. Draven could feel the court watching, waiting to see if he'd punish this woman's audacity. Part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to remind her and everyone else exactly what happened when you challenged the king. But another part, the part that was still human, that still remembered what it felt like to care about something other than survival, was fascinated. She wasn't afraid of him. Everyone was afraid of him. What's your name? He looked down at the servant girl, who was still curled on the floor. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. Mira, Your Majesty. Mira. Draven turned back to Celine. She's yours. But hear me clearly, Lady Virel. If she causes trouble, you will answer for it personally, and my punishments are not gentle. Something flashed in Celine's eyes. Not fear, something fiercer. I understand, Your Majesty. He should have walked away then. Should have turned and left and forgotten about the woman with the fearless eyes and the voice that didn't shake. But he didn't. He stood there, trapped by something he couldn't name, while the beast inside him went quieter than it had been in years. Finally, Corwin coughed softly behind him. Your Majesty, the ceremony... Draven blinked. The spell broke. He nodded once to Celine, then strode away, his personal guard falling into step around him. But he felt her eyes on his back the entire way across the hall. And for the first time in 10 years, the beast wasn't trying to claw its way out of his skin. It was watching her too. But... Celine Viral stood in the wreckage of what had just happened and tried to remember how to breathe. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. Her hands, clasped in front of her, were shaking. She'd just challenged the king, the Alpha King, the man who'd conquered 12 kingdoms and burned 3 cities to ash when they refused to surrender. The man who everyone said was more monster than human. She'd looked him in the eye and told him no. Are you insane? The voice belonged to her cousin Marcus, who appeared at her elbow looking pale and furious. Do you have any idea what you just did? Celine forced herself to unclench her jaw. I saved that girl's life. You risked your own. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the edge of the hall, where they wouldn't be overheard. Celine, the king doesn't tolerate defiance. You heard the stories. Last year, he had a man drawn and quartered for speaking against him in a tavern. A tavern? What do you think he'll do to someone who challenges him in front of the entire court? He won't do anything. Celine pulled free, trying to ignore the way her pulse was still racing. She kept her voice low. He agreed to my terms. Gave me the girl. Because he's playing with you. Marcus's expression was grim. You're a novelty, something interesting. But the second you stop being entertaining, he'll crush you without a second thought. That's what he does. That's what... Celine looked across the hall to where the king had disappeared. She could still see him in her mind's eye. Tall, brutal, terrifying. But there had been something else there, too. Something in his eyes when he'd looked down at the servant girl. Not pity, exactly. Something darker. Like he understood what it meant to be helpless. Like he hated it. I'm not afraid of him, Celine said quietly. Then you're a fool. Marcus shook his head. House Viral can't protect you if you make an enemy of the crown. Father would disown you in a heartbeat if it meant saving the family name. He wouldn't be the first. Celine's smile was bitter. I've been an embarrassment since I refused to marry Lord Castellan's son. One more scandal won't matter. This isn't a scandal, Celine. This is suicide. Before she could respond, a hand closed around her shoulder. She turned to find Mira, the servant girl, staring up at her with wide, wet eyes. The blood from her split lip had been hastily wiped away, but the bruise was already forming, dark and ugly. My lady, Mira's voice shook. Thank you. I don't know how to... Don't thank me yet. Celine's expression softened. Can you work? Truly work, I mean. Not just survive, but excel. Mira nodded frantically. Yes. Yes, my lady. I swear it. Good. Because I just bet my life on you. Celine's smile was sharp. Don't make me regret it. The girl paled, then curtsied so low she nearly fell over. I won't, my lady. I promise. Celine watched her hurry away, then turned back to Marcus. Her cousin was watching her with something between admiration and horror. You really are insane, he muttered. Probably. Celine's gaze drifted back to the far end of the hall, but she couldn't shake the memory of the king's eyes. The way they'd gone from cold and dead to something almost alive when he'd looked at her. Like he'd been sleeping for years and had just woken up. Like he'd been waiting for someone to see him. Celine. Marcus's voice was urgent. Promise me you'll be careful. The king isn't a man, he's a weapon, and weapons don't care who they cut. I know. Celine straightened her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. But sometimes the only way to survive a monster is to look it in the eye and refuse to flinch. And if it eats you, then at least I'll die standing. Draven made it to his private chambers before the transformation hit. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last, like someone was taking a hammer to his bones from the inside. He collapsed against the wall, gasping as his vision bled to red. His fingers spasmed, nails lengthening into claws that gouged deep furrows in the stone. Somewhere distant, he heard himself growl. The sound was inhuman. Not now. Not now. Hold it together. But the beast didn't care about timing or appearances or the fact that half the court was probably still watching for signs of weakness. It wanted out. It wanted blood and violence, and the kind of release that only came from tearing something apart with its bare hands. Draven dragged himself toward the reinforced room at the back of his chambers, the one with walls 3 feet thick and a door that locked from the outside. Corwin kept the key. Corwin was the only one he trusted not to let him out, no matter how much the beast begged or threatened or promised. He was halfway there when his legs gave out. The world tilted. He hit the floor hard, convulsing, as his spine arched and his muscles tore and reformed. This was the worst part. Not the pain, but the loss of control. The feeling of himself dissolving piece by piece until there was nothing left but hunger and rage and the beast's simple, terrible logic. Kill, hunt, destroy. Then, impossibly, the pain stopped. Not gradually. Not like a storm passing. Just gone. Like someone had thrown a switch. Draven lay on the floor, gasping, as his vision cleared and his claws retracted and his heart slowed from its frantic gallop to something almost normal. The beast was still there. He could feel it, pacing beneath his skin. But it wasn't trying to break free anymore. It was watching something. Celine Viral's face flashed through his mind. Dark eyes, sharp chin, that expression of calm calculation when she'd stepped forward to defend a stranger. The way she'd looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him, like she could see something worth seeing. The beast had gone quiet when she'd spoken. Why? Draven pushed himself upright, his hands still shaking. In 10 years, nothing had stopped the transformations. Nothing had even slowed them. He'd tried meditation, herbs, bloodletting, every old wife's tale, and physician's remedy in the known world. Nothing worked. The curse was a countdown, and he was just waiting for the clock to hit 0. But she'd stopped it. One woman, one moment, and the beast had listened. Draven staggered to his feet and crossed to the window. Outside, the capital city of Varithus sprawled in all directions, a maze of stone and shadow and 10 million lives that depended on him staying human long enough to keep them safe. He'd built this empire with blood and steel and the kind of ruthless efficiency that turned enemies into corpses and allies into servants. He'd done terrible things in the name of strength, necessary things. He'd stopped feeling guilty about it years ago. But tonight, looking down at the city, he felt something stir, something dangerously close to hope. There was a knock at the door. Corwin's voice filtered through. "Your Majesty? Are you—" "I'm fine." Draven didn't turn around. The transformation passed. Silence. Then, "That's impossible. I know." More silence. Draven could practically hear his advisor's mind working, cycling through possibilities and implications, and all the ways this could go wrong. Finally, "What happened?" "I don't know." Draven pressed his palm against the cold glass. "But I'm going to find out." Celine Viral spent the rest of the ceremony trying to become invisible. It didn't work. Everywhere she went, people stared. Some with curiosity, some with barely concealed disgust, a few with something that looked almost like admiration. The story of her confrontation with the king had spread through the hall like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By the time she reached the wine table, she'd apparently either saved the servant girl from execution or seduced the king into mercy with a single glance, depending on who was talking. Neither version was true, but truth had never mattered much to the nobility. Lady Virel. The voice was smooth as silk and twice as expensive. Celine turned to find Prince Malric standing behind her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered one with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That was quite the performance earlier. I don't think I've ever seen someone speak to my brother like that and live to tell about it." Celine took the glass but didn't drink. "Your Highness, I wasn't trying to perform. I was trying to help." "Of course." Malric's smile widened. "How noble. Tell me, do you often throw yourself into danger for strangers, or was today special?" There was something in his tone that set her teeth on edge. Something mocking, like he was laughing at a joke only he understood. Celine kept her voice neutral. "I don't think standing up for a servant qualifies as danger, Your Highness." "No." Malric's eyes glittered. But standing up to the king certainly does, especially when the king in question is barely holding on to his sanity. Celine's fingers tightened around her glass. That sounded dangerously close to treason. Malric laughed, a short, sharp sound. Treason. What a delightfully archaic word. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something conspiratorial. Let me give you some advice, Lady Virel. My brother is not a man. He's a monster wearing a crown, and the only thing keeping that crown on his head is fear. The second people stop being afraid, the second they realize he's more beast than king, this empire will tear itself apart. And you, with your noble gestures and your fearless eyes, just became the most interesting person in this palace. He straightened, raising his glass in a mock toast. Welcome to the game, my lady. Try not to die before it gets interesting. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before Celine could respond. She stood there, heart pounding, as the full weight of what she'd done crashed down on her. Malric was right. She'd just painted a target on her own back. The king's attention, the court's scrutiny, the prince's veiled threats. She'd walked into a nest of vipers wearing nothing but good intentions. Marcus appeared at her side. We're leaving. Now. Celine didn't argue. She set down her untouched wine and let him guide her toward the exit. But as they passed through the great doors, she felt it again. That prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The feeling of being watched. She turned, just for a second, and looked back. At the far end of the hall, silhouetted against the light of 100 candles, stood the king. Even from this distance, even through the crowd, she could feel his eyes on her, could feel the weight of that impossible gaze, the one that saw too much and promised nothing. Then someone moved between them, and he was gone. Celine turned away and walked out into the night, her heart still racing, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. She didn't know what game she'd stumbled into, didn't know the rules or the stakes or how to survive, but she knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever, and there was no going back. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of an executioner's blade. Celine woke to sunlight stabbing through her bedroom window and the sound of her cousin pacing outside her door like a caged wolf. She knew that rhythm. Marcus only paced when something had gone catastrophically wrong. She dragged herself out of bed, every muscle protesting. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the king's face. That moment when his expression had shifted from cold brutality to something almost human. The way the entire throne room had gone silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. The way Prince Malric had looked at her afterward. Like she was a chess piece he'd just discovered on a board he thought he'd already won. Celine! Marcus's voice cut through the door. We have a problem. She pulled on a robe and opened the door. Marcus stood there, face pale, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with black wax. The royal seal. She didn't need to see it up close to know what it was. When did this arrive? An hour ago. Marcus thrust it at her. A royal courier delivered it personally. Half the household saw. Do you understand what this means? Celine broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was harsh, angular, like someone had attacked the paper with the pen. Lady Celine Virel, you will present yourself at the palace at noon today. The king requests your presence. This is not optional. No signature, no pleasantries, just the command and the implicit threat behind it. Celine's hands didn't shake. That surprised her. She'd expected fear, but what she felt instead was something sharper. Anticipation, maybe, or the kind of clarity that came right before you stepped off a cliff and committed to the fall. I'm going, she said. You're insane. Marcus grabbed her arm. Celine, listen to me. This isn't an invitation. It's a summons. The king doesn't request, he takes. And right now he wants you close enough to either use or destroy. Maybe. Celine pulled free and moved to her wardrobe. She started sorting through dresses, looking for something that walked the line between respectful and defiant. But I gave him my word about the servant girl. I told him I'd take responsibility. If I don't show up, he'll think I'm a coward. Better a living coward than a dead hero. Marcus's voice cracked. Your father already disowned you for refusing that marriage. House Virel can't protect you from the crown. If the king decides you're a threat or a toy or just an inconvenience, you'll disappear. No trial, no witnesses, just gone. Celine turned to face him. Her cousin looked genuinely terrified, and that more than anything made her realize how serious this was. Marcus had survived at court for years by knowing when to bow and when to run. If he was this afraid, she should be too. But she wasn't. Something about yesterday had changed inside her. She'd looked into the eyes of the most dangerous man in the Empire and seen past the monster to something underneath, something damaged and desperate and trying so hard not to break. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed to see it again. "I'll be careful," she said quietly. "I promise." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're already gone. I can see it. Whatever hold he's got on you, it's already too late. He's not holding anything." Celine pulled out a dress in deep forest green. Simple, elegant, the kind of thing that wouldn't scream for attention but wouldn't apologize for existing either. "I just want to understand." Understand what? Why everyone's so afraid of him? Celine met her cousin's eyes. "I saw him yesterday, Marcus. Really saw him. And yes, he's terrifying. But he's also suffering. You could see it in the way he moved, the way he wouldn't look at people directly, like he was afraid of what he might do if he lost control. That's exactly why you should stay away." Marcus's voice was urgent. "Men who can't control themselves are the most dangerous kind. They don't mean to hurt you. They just do." "Maybe." Celine turned back to the mirror, studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her didn't look like someone about to walk into the lion's den. She looked calm, determined, maybe a little reckless. I guess we'll find out. The Palace of Varithus was a fortress pretending to be a home. Celine arrived at noon exactly, escorted by 2 royal guards who'd shown up at her family's estate with expressions that suggested they'd drag her there in chains if necessary. They didn't speak during the journey, didn't look at her, just marched her through the gates and into the palace like she was a prisoner being delivered for sentencing. The halls were colder than she remembered, darker. Every surface was marble or stone or cold metal, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Tapestries depicted battle scenes so violent they bordered on grotesque. The few servants they passed kept their eyes down, moving quickly, like they were afraid of being noticed. This wasn't a palace. It was a monument to fear. The guards stopped outside a set of heavy oak doors. One of them knocked twice, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. "Lady Celine Virel, Your Majesty." Then they left, closing the door behind them with a finality that made Celine's stomach clench. The room beyond was smaller than she'd expected. Not a throne room or grand hall, but what looked like a private study. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with volumes that actually looked read rather than decorative. A desk sat near the window, covered in maps and documents, and standing at that window, backlit by noon sun, was the king. He didn't turn around immediately, just stood there, one hand pressed against the glass, his silhouette sharp against the light. From this angle, he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. Then he spoke, and the illusion shattered. "You came." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much recently. "I wasn't certain you would. You didn't give me much choice." Celine kept her voice steady. The letter said it wasn't optional. It wasn't. Draven turned to face her, and Celine's breath caught. He looked worse than yesterday. The shadows under his eyes were deeper, darker. His jaw was tight with tension, and there was something in his expression that bordered on desperation. He'd changed out of the ceremonial armor into simpler clothes, but they hung on him like he'd lost weight recently, like his body was consuming itself from the inside. But his eyes, God. Those eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, haunted by something that went deeper than physical pain. "Sit." He gestured to a chair near the desk. "Please." The please surprised her. Celine sat, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. Draven moved to the other side of the desk, but didn't sit. He stood there, looming, and Celine forced herself not to look away. "I want to discuss the servant girl," he said finally. "Mira, has she done something wrong?" "No. If anything, she's exceeded expectations." His fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous gesture which was strange for someone who projected such absolute control. "But that's not why I asked you here." "Then why?" Draven was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Dangerous in a different way. Yesterday, in the throne room, when you stepped forward, something happened." Celine's pulse quickened. "I don't understand." His eyes locked onto hers. "The beast inside me went quiet. The words hung in the air between them. Celine didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if there was anything to say. The way he was looking at her now wasn't predatory. It was desperate, like a drowning man who'd just spotted land. "I don't know what that means," she said carefully. "It means you're either the solution to my curse or the thing that finally destroys me." Draven's jaw clenched. "And I need to know which." Celine's mind raced. She'd heard the rumors about the king's curse. Everyone had, but they were always vague, wrapped in superstition and fear. The alpha bloodline, the madness that came with power, men who slowly lost their humanity until there was nothing left but rage and hunger. Looking at him now, at the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands kept clenching into fists, she realized the rumors weren't exaggerated enough. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I want you to stay." The words came out fast, like he'd been holding them back and they'd finally broken free. "Here, in the palace. Close enough that I can figure out what you do to me. That's insane." "Probably." Something flickered in his expression. Might have been a smile, but it was too bitter to be sure. "But you walked into my hall yesterday and challenged me in front of half the court. You stood between me and a helpless girl and demanded I show mercy. Either you're insane too, or you saw something worth saving." Celine's throat felt tight. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll let you go." Draven's voice was flat. "I won't force you, won't threaten you. You can walk out that door and return to your life, and I'll never bother you again." He meant it. She could see it in his eyes, but she could also see what that would cost him. The hope draining away, the walls going back up, the monster winning. "And if I stay," she said slowly, "what happens then?" "I don't know." The honesty in his voice was brutal. "I don't know if you can help me. Don't know if this is temporary or if yesterday was just a fluke, but for the first time in 10 years, I felt something other than rage and hunger. For 10 seconds, the beast stopped trying to claw its way out of my skin, and I could breathe." His hands were shaking now. He shoved them into his pockets, but not before Celine saw. Not before she understood that this wasn't a king making demands. This was a man begging for a lifeline. "You're asking me to be your anchor," she said. "I'm asking you to be my chance." Draven's eyes burned into hers. "One chance to figure out if I can be saved or if I'm already too far gone. That's all." Celine should have said no, should have stood up, walked out, and never looked back. Marcus was right. This was dangerous, insane, a gamble with stakes she couldn't possibly understand. But she thought about the servant girl yesterday, the way Draven had intervened when he didn't have to, the crack in his armor when he'd looked down at someone helpless and seen himself. She thought about the way the entire court feared him, but no one actually saw him. And she thought about the look in his eyes right now. Not the king, not the monster, just a man who was running out of time. "I'll stay," she said. Draven's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Relief, maybe. Or disbelief. "Why?" "Because I think you're right." Celine stood, meeting his gaze. "I think you're suffering. And I think everyone around you is so busy being terrified that no one's actually trying to help." "Help?" He said the word like it was foreign. "People don't help kings. They use them or they run from them. Then maybe it's time someone tried something different." Celine's voice hardened. "But I have conditions." "Of course you do." That bitter almost smile again. "What do you want?" "The truth. About your curse. About what's really happening to you." Celine crossed her arms. "If I'm going to be your anchor, I need to know what I'm anchoring you against." Draven studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to the door, locked it, and turned back to face her. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "I'm dying." Slowly. "The curse is eating me from the inside out, turning me into something that isn't human anymore. Some nights I wake up covered in blood and can't remember where I've been or what I've done. The transformations are getting worse, longer, more violent. My physicians say I have maybe 2 years before I lose myself completely. Before the beast takes over and never gives me back." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've killed people, Celine, in that form. I don't remember their faces, but I remember the taste of their blood. I remember the satisfaction of tearing them apart. And the worst part is, some mornings I wake up and I don't feel guilty anymore, just hungry for more." Celine's breath caught. She'd known it was bad, but hearing him say it out loud, seeing the self-loathing in his eyes, was different. This wasn't a monster. This was a man trapped inside a nightmare. How long have you been dealing with this alone? 10 years. Since my father died and the curse passed to me. He paused. It's hereditary. Every male in the alpha line gets it. Most don't make it past 40. My father was 38 when he finally lost control and had to be put down like a rabid dog. Celine's stomach turned. That's why your brother wants the throne. Malric's immune. Second sons don't carry the curse. Draven's laugh was harsh. He's been waiting for me to turn so he can step in as the sane alternative. The savior. The only problem is, if I die before I name an heir, the empire fractures. Civil war. Millions dead. So I'm trying to hold on long enough to prevent that. And you think I can help? I think you're the first person in 10 years who's made the beast quiet down instead of rage harder. Draven's eyes burned into hers. I don't know why. I don't know how. But yesterday when you spoke, something in me listened. And if there's even a chance you can do that again, I have to try. Celine stood there absorbing it all. The weight of what he was asking. The impossibility of it. She was a noble woman with no training in medicine or magic or whatever it would take to stop a curse that had been killing Alpha Kings for generations. But she'd seen the way he'd looked at that servant girl, the humanity still buried underneath all the violence and fear. If that could be saved, if he could be saved, wasn't that worth trying? I need to see it, she said finally. The transformation. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Draven's face went pale. No, absolutely not. If I'm going to help, I need to know what I'm facing. You'll see it and run. Everyone does. Draven's voice cracked. I can't blame them. It's not human. It's not even animal. It's just rage and hunger wrapped in flesh and claws. Then show me. Celine stepped closer. Because if you're right, if I really do calm the beast, then you won't hurt me. And if you're wrong, at least I'll die knowing I tried. That's not comforting. It's honest. Celine's eyes didn't waver. When's the next transformation? Tonight. They're getting more frequent. Draven looked away. There's a room, reinforced. The walls are 3 feet thick and the door locks from the outside. My advisor Corwin has the key. He'll let me out in the morning if I survive the night. The casual way he said it broke something in Celine's chest. How often do you not survive? Twice so far I've woken up with injuries that should have killed me. Draven's voice was flat. The curse keeps me alive. Keeps me healing. It wants me functional so it can keep using me. Celine made a decision that would either save her life or end it. I'm going to be in that room with you tonight. No. Draven's response was immediate, almost violent. Absolutely not. You said the beast goes quiet around me. We need to test that. Celine kept her voice calm, even though her heart was trying to punch through her ribs. If I can't calm it, you'll turn and probably kill me. But at least we'll know for certain whether I'm useful or just delusional. I won't risk it. It's not your risk to take. Celine stepped even closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. This is my choice, my gamble. If you want me to stay and help, this is the price. They stood there inches apart, locked in a battle of wills. Draven was taller, stronger, infinitely more dangerous. But Celine didn't flinch, didn't back down. She just waited. Finally, Draven exhaled. You're going to die. Maybe. Celine's smile was grim. But at least it'll be interesting. Mqing. Word of Celine's continued presence in the palace spread through the court like poison through water. By evening, everyone knew she'd been summoned by the king. By nightfall, half the nobles were speculating about what that meant. Was she his new mistress, his advisor? Some kind of political pawn in a game no one else understood. The theories got wilder with each retelling. Celine ignored all of it. She spent the afternoon with Mira, making sure the girl understood her duties and had everything she needed. The servant was terrified but grateful, working harder than anyone else in the kitchens and keeping her head down. Exactly what she needed to survive in this place. As sunset approached, Celine returned to the room she'd been given. It was nicer than her quarters at House Virel, larger, better furnished, but it felt like a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. There was a knock at the door. Celine opened it to find Lord Corwin, the king's advisor. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Lady Virel. His voice was carefully neutral. His Majesty asked me to escort you to the reinforced chamber. Already? Celine glanced at the window. The sun was barely down. The transformations have been starting earlier. Corwin's expression was grim. We need to get you both secured before full dark. Celine grabbed a cloak and followed him into the hallway. They moved through the palace in silence, descending stairs that got progressively narrower and darker. This wasn't the public section of the palace. This was the underbelly, the place where secrets lived. Finally, they stopped outside a door made of iron and reinforced steel. Corwin pulled out a key, then paused. Are you certain about this, Lady Virel? Once I lock that door, no one opens it until dawn. If something goes wrong, then I'll deal with it. Celine's voice was steady. Thank you for your concern, Lord Corwin, but I know what I'm doing. I sincerely doubt that. But Corwin opened the door anyway. The king is waiting. The room beyond was exactly what Draven had described. 3-foot-thick stone walls, no windows, no furniture except a pallet in the corner, and heavy chains bolted to the floor. And standing in the center of it all, already stripped to the waist, was the king. His torso was a roadmap of scars. Old ones, new ones, some that looked like they'd been inflicted by claws rather than blades. But what caught Celine's attention was the tension in his body. Every muscle was coiled tight, ready to snap. You came... Draven's voice was hoarse. I was hoping you'd change your mind. Not a chance. Celine stepped inside and the door clanged shut behind her. The sound of the lock engaging was final. Terminal. They were alone. This is your last chance to leave. Draven didn't look at her, just stared at the wall, breathing too fast. Corwin will let you out if you knock. I'm not leaving. Celine moved closer, studying him. How long until it starts? Minutes. Maybe less. His hands clenched into fists. When it does, stay against the far wall. Don't move. Don't speak. The beast responds to fear and aggression. If you can stay calm, you might survive. And if I can't, then I'll try to kill you quickly. The brutal honesty in his voice was somehow worse than a threat. I won't mean to. Won't want to. But the beast doesn't care about intentions. Celine's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to nod. Understood. They stood there in tense silence as the last light faded from the cracks around the door. Celine could hear Draven's breathing getting rougher, harsher, could see his shoulders starting to hunch. Then he made a sound that wasn't quite human. Celine. His voice was barely recognizable. Get back. Now. She didn't move, just watched as he fell to his knees, convulsing. His spine arched, his hand slammed against the stone floor, and she heard bones crack and reform. The sound was wet and wrong, and would probably haunt her nightmares forever. Draven screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was raw agony and rage and something deeper. Something primal. His body twisted, muscles bulging and tearing and rebuilding themselves. His jaw elongated, his teeth sharpened into fangs. Fur erupted across his skin in patches, dark as midnight, and his eyes. God. His eyes went from human brown to something golden and feral and completely empty of recognition. The transformation took maybe 30 seconds. When it was over, the thing crouched in the center of the room wasn't a man anymore. It was a beast. 7 feet of muscle and claws and barely controlled violence, breathing hard, scanning the room for threats. Its eyes locked onto Celine. She stopped breathing. The beast moved toward her, not rushing, not attacking, just stalking, the way a predator approaches prey it knows can't escape. Every step was deliberate, controlled, like it was savoring the moment before the kill. Celine's back hit the wall. She had nowhere to go, nothing to defend herself with. Just her voice and the desperate hope that Draven was right about her effect on the curse. The beast stopped 3 feet away. This close she could smell it, blood and sweat and something wild. Could see the intelligence behind those golden eyes. This wasn't a mindless animal. This was something worse. This was Draven with all his restraint stripped away. The beast's lips pulled back, revealing fangs that could tear her throat out in one bite. It growled, low and threatening. Celine did the only thing she could think of. She spoke. Draven. Her voice shook, but she got the words out. I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. The beast tilted its head, confused maybe, or annoyed that its prey was making noise. "I'm not afraid of you." That was a lie, but she said it anyway. "I see you, not the curse, not the beast, you. The man who saved a servant girl yesterday because he remembered what it felt like to be helpless." The growling stopped. The beast went very still. "You don't want to hurt me." Celine's hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against the wall behind her. "You're stronger than this. Stronger than the curse. I know you are." The beast leaned closer. Its breath was hot against her face. For a moment, Celine was absolutely certain she was about to die. Then the beast did something that stopped her heart. It whimpered, not a growl, not a threat, a sound of pain and confusion, like something trapped and desperate to get out. The golden eyes blinked, and for just a second, Celine saw something human looking back at her. "That's it." She kept her voice soft. "Come back. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." The beast's clawed hand came up slowly, almost tentatively. Celine held her breath as it reached toward her face. One swipe and she'd be dead. One moment of lost control and this was over. The claws stopped an inch from her cheek, trembling. Then the beast pulled back, turned away, and collapsed in the corner. It curled into itself, shaking, making that same wounded sound over and over. Celine slid down the wall and sat there, heart hammering, trying to process what had just happened. The beast hadn't attacked, hadn't hurt her. It had recognized her voice, her words, and something in Draven had fought its way to the surface long enough to stop. She'd been right, she could reach him. Even like this, even when he was more monster than man. Celine watched the beast's shoulders shake and made another decision that defied all logic and self-preservation. She stood up and moved closer. The beast's head snapped up, eyes tracking her movement. "It's okay." Celine kept her hands visible, non-threatening. "I'm not leaving. I promised I'd stay, and I meant it." She sat down a few feet away from the beast, close enough to show trust, far enough to run if she'd misjudged. The beast watched her with those unreadable golden eyes, breathing hard. They stayed like that for hours. Celine talking quietly about nothing important, just keeping up a steady stream of words to remind the beast that she was human, that Draven was human, that there was something worth holding on to underneath all the violence and hunger. The beast didn't attack, didn't move, just listened. Its breathing gradually slowing, its body uncurling slightly. By the time dawnlight crept under the door, the beast was asleep. And Celine, exhausted and terrified and strangely exhilarated, realized she'd just survived the impossible. She'd faced the monster and found the man underneath. The door unlocked. Corwin stood there, pale and shocked, staring at Celine sitting alive and unharmed next to the sleeping beast. "Lady Varel." His voice was barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "I kept my promise." Celine stood on shaking legs. "And I'm going to do it again tonight, and every night after that until we figure out how to save him. Because that's what this was now. Not a gamble, not an experiment, a mission. Draven Kalor was dying, and everyone around him had given up. But Celine had seen the humanity still buried under the curse, had felt it respond to her voice, and she couldn't walk away from that. She wouldn't, even if it killed her. Every night, Celine entered the reinforced chamber. Every night, Draven transformed into something that should have torn her apart. And every night, she talked him down from the edge, her voice the only thing standing between the man and the beast that wanted to consume him completely. The court watched, whispered, speculated. Some said she was a witch, others claimed she was using dark magic or sleeping with the king, or both. Celine ignored all of it. She had one job, and it wasn't winning popularity contests among people who'd already decided she was either a saint or a whore, depending on which story served them better. What mattered was that it was working. The transformations were lasting shorter. Draven was regaining control faster. There were still nights when the beast raged and threw itself against the walls hard enough to crack stone, but those moments were becoming rarer. More importantly, Draven was starting to remember. Not everything, but fragments. Her voice. Her face. The feeling of being anchored to something other than violence. He was coming back. Celine knew this should have made her feel victorious. Instead, it made her feel like she was walking on ice that was cracking with every step. Success in this palace wasn't celebrated. It was envied, resented, and eventually punished. She'd seen it in the way certain nobles looked at her now, the ones who'd built careers on predicting the king's death and positioning themselves for the aftermath. Every day Draven stayed human was another day their plans fell apart. She just hadn't realized how desperate that made them. It was Lord Corwin who came to her chambers on the 22nd night, his face gray with something that looked like guilt. "Lady Viral, we need to talk now." Celine had been preparing for the evening session. She set down the cloak she'd been folding and studied Corwin's expression. The advisor was usually unreadable, trained by decades of court politics to show nothing, but tonight his hands were shaking. What happened? Corwin closed the door behind him and leaned against it like he was blocking an escape route. "How much do you know about the king's physicians?" The question was so unexpected that Celine blinked. "Not much. I know they've been treating him for years." "Why?" "Because 3 of them just resigned." Corwin's voice was tight, simultaneously, without explanation. They packed their belongings and left the palace within the hour. Celine's stomach dropped. "That's not normal." "Nothing about this situation is normal." Corwin moved to the window, checking the courtyard below like he expected to find enemies there. "But it gets worse. Before they left, one of them came to me, privately. He said he couldn't keep working here because his conscience wouldn't allow it." "Allow what?" Corwin turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Celine's blood run cold. "They've been poisoning the king, not to kill him, to make the curse worse." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Celine couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The floor felt like it was tilting underneath her. "That's impossible." Her voice came out strangled. "Why would they do that? They're physicians. They're supposed to help him." They were being paid, handsomely, by someone who wants the king to lose control as quickly as possible. Corwin's jaw clenched. The physician wouldn't say who, he was too afraid, but he confirmed they've been adding compounds to Draven's medication for the past 6 months, things that accelerate the transformation, make it more violent, harder to resist. Celine's mind raced. 6 months. That meant everything they'd been fighting against, every horrible night in that chamber, had been artificially worsened by people Draven trusted, people who were supposed to keep him alive. She thought about the nights when the transformation had hit harder than usual, when Draven had screamed like he was being torn apart from the inside, when the beast had been so violent that even her voice couldn't reach it. That hadn't been the curse running its natural course. That had been deliberate sabotage. Someone had been torturing him. On purpose. For months. Who? Celine's voice was deadly quiet. Who paid them? "I don't know." Corwin's expression was grim. But there's only a handful of people with the resources and motivation to orchestrate something like this. High nobles, members of the royal family, people who stand to gain from the king's death. Prince Malric. The name fell out of her mouth before she could stop it, but once it was spoken, it made horrible sense. Malric was immune to the curse. Malric was the heir if Draven died. Malric had everything to gain from his brother losing control and being put down like the animal everyone feared he'd become. Corwin didn't confirm or deny it. He just looked at her with eyes that had seen too much betrayal in too many years. What matters now is that they stopped. The physicians fled before they could be caught, and without them continuing the poisoning, the king's condition should stabilize. Improve, even. Should. Celine latched onto the word. "But you're not certain." "I'm not certain of anything anymore." Corwin rubbed his face. "This palace is a nest of vipers, and I don't know who to trust. For all I know, there are others involved. Guards, servants, people close to the king who've been working against him this entire time." Celine's chest felt tight. She'd been so focused on helping Draven fight the curse that she hadn't paid attention to the threats surrounding them. Hadn't realized that while she was trying to save him, someone else was actively trying to destroy him. And she'd been too naive, too trusting to see it. This was what power looked like. Not the throne or the crown or the public displays of dominance. This. The poison slipped into medicine. The betrayal dressed up as loyalty. The people who smiled to your face while sharpening knives for your back. Does the king know? Not yet. Corwin's expression was haunted. "I wanted to tell you first, because you've been with him every night. You've seen how bad it gets. And I need you to understand that it could have been so much worse. that the only reason he's still alive is because something in him was strong enough to fight through the poison and the curse simultaneously. Celine felt something shift inside her chest. Draven had been fighting 2 wars at once and hadn't even known it. He thought his own body was betraying him, that the curse was naturally accelerating, that he was simply too weak to hold it back. But the truth was, he'd been strong enough to survive an assassination attempt that had been going on for half a year. And no one had noticed. No one had protected him, not his physicians, not his guards, not the court that claimed to serve him. He'd been completely alone, drowning in a nightmare that someone else had deliberately made worse, and the only thing that had saved him was his own brutal determination to keep breathing. We tell him tonight. Celine's voice was steel. Before the transformation, he deserves to know. Corwin nodded. I'll arrange a private meeting. But Lady Virel, you need to prepare yourself. When the king finds out someone close to him has been orchestrating this, he's going to want blood, and he won't stop until he finds out who's responsible. Good. Celine's eyes were cold. He shouldn't. Huag. Draven took the news exactly as badly as Celine expected. They met in his private study an hour before sunset. Corwin laid out everything the physician had confessed, every detail of the months-long poisoning, while Draven stood at the window with his back to both of them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, perfectly still, as his world collapsed around him. When Corwin finished, the silence was suffocating. Then Draven's fist went through the window. Glass exploded outward. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but he didn't seem to notice. His shoulders were heaving, his breathing ragged, and Celine could see the moment the rage took over, the moment the man started losing to the beast. Your Majesty. Corwin's voice was urgent. You need to calm down. If you transform now before we've secured the chamber... 6 months. Draven's voice was barely human. 6 months of thinking I was losing my mind. Thinking I was too weak to control my own curse, and the entire time someone was poisoning me. He turned and Celine's breath caught. His eyes were already starting to shift, gold bleeding into brown, the curse responding to the fury pouring off him in waves. Your Majesty, please. Corwin stepped forward. We'll find who's responsible. We'll make them pay. But right now, you need to... I know who's responsible. Draven's voice dropped to something deadly. There's only one person in this palace with the resources, the motivation, and the complete lack of conscience required to orchestrate something like this. He didn't say the name, didn't need to. They all knew. Malric. The word hung between them like a lit fuse. Celine watched Draven's expression cycle through rage and betrayal and something that looked almost like grief, because this wasn't just political maneuvering. This was his brother, his blood. The person who should have stood by him, but had instead chosen to slowly torture him to death. That kind of betrayal didn't just break trust. It shattered something fundamental. The belief that family meant loyalty, that blood was supposed to protect blood, that you could survive anything as long as you weren't fighting alone. Draven had been alone, fighting his own brother without even knowing it, and that realization was tearing him apart from the inside. We don't have proof. Corwin's voice was careful. The physician wouldn't name names. If you accuse the prince without evidence, then he'll deny it. Draven's laugh was bitter. He'll play the concerned brother, the loyal prince, and half the court will believe him because they want to believe him, because a sane heir is better than a cursed king. He wasn't wrong. Celine had seen how people looked at Malric. Charm and intelligence wrapped in careful concern for the Empire's future. If it came down to Draven's word against his brothers, especially without concrete proof, the court would fracture. Some would support the king, others would support the prince. And the Empire would tear itself apart in the resulting civil war, which was probably exactly what Malric wanted. There has to be another way. Celine spoke for the first time since Corwin had started the briefing, something that exposes him without giving him the chance to play victim. Draven's eyes locked onto hers. What are you suggesting? A trap. Celine's mind was racing, putting pieces together. If Malric thinks the poisoning is still working, if he believes you're still deteriorating, he'll get confident, sloppy. We can use that. How? Keep pretending the transformations are getting worse. Celine moved closer, her voice urgent. Let him think his plan is working. Meanwhile, we investigate. Quietly. Find proof of the payments to the physicians. Track down who gave the orders. Build a case so solid that when we finally move against him, there's no room for doubt. That could take weeks. Draven's jaw clenched. Months. You want me to just let him walk free while we play detective? I want you to stay alive long enough to destroy him properly. Celine met his gaze. If you go after him now, without proof, he wins. Even if you kill him, he wins. Because the Empire will see a mad king executing his own brother, and everything you've built will collapse. The words were brutal, but they were true. Draven's greatest strength had always been his willingness to do whatever it took to protect the Empire, even when it cost him personally, even when it meant swallowing his pride or his rage or his desperate need for revenge. That was what separated a king from a tyrant, the ability to see past personal pain to the larger picture. But looking at him now, Celine wasn't sure he had that kind of restraint left. The betrayal had cut too deep. The anger was too raw, and the beast inside him was feeding on that fury, growing stronger with every passing second. Your Majesty. Corwin's voice was soft. She's right. As much as it galls me to say it, Lady Varel is right. We need evidence, strategy, patience. I don't have patience. Draven's hands were shaking. I have 6 months before the curse takes me permanently, maybe less. Every day we wait is another day my brother walks free after trying to murder me. Then we work fast. Celine stepped closer, close enough to see the gold receding slightly from his eyes. We find the proof. We build the trap. And when it's ready, you spring it. But we do this smart, not emotional. Smart. Draven's laugh was hollow. You want me to be smart while the person I trusted most in this world was slowly killing me? Yes, Celine's voice hardened, because that's what kings do. They survive, they adapt, they find a way to win even when everything is burning down around them. The words seemed to cut through the rage, at least partially. Draven stared at her, breathing hard, and Celine could see him fighting for control. See the man clawing his way back from the edge of transformation through sheer force of will. Finally, he nodded. 1 month. We have 1 month to find proof. After that, evidence or not, I'm done playing games. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. Celine exhaled slowly. 1 month. We can work with that. Corwin looked between them. I'll start investigating the financial records. See if I can trace any large payments to the physicians. But Your Majesty, you need to be careful. If Malric suspects we know, then he'll accelerate his plans. Draven's expression was grim, which means we need to watch him, constantly, and we need to figure out who else is working with him. That's where I come in. Celine had already been thinking about this, turning over possibilities in her mind. I'm still new to court, still an outsider. People don't see me as a threat yet. I can ask questions, listen to conversations, get close to people who might know something. You'd be putting yourself in danger. Draven's voice was rough. If Malric realizes you're investigating, he'll come after me. I know. Celine's smile was grim. But I'm already in danger just by being here. Might as well make it count. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Publicly, nothing changed. Draven continued his royal duties with the same brutal efficiency he'd always shown. The nightly transformations continued, though now Celine knew they should have been improving instead of maintaining their current intensity. She and Draven made sure to act like the curse was still winning, like every night was a desperate battle for control. It wasn't hard to fake. The rage Draven felt toward his brother fed the beast almost as effectively as the poison had. Privately, they became hunters. Corwin worked the financial angle, quietly digging through palace records and merchant logs. Celine worked the social angle, attending every court function and garden party, asking careful questions and listening to the gossip that flowed like wine. And Draven watched his brother, studying every movement, every conversation, looking for cracks in the perfect facade. It was exhausting, dangerous. And slowly, piece by piece, they started to build a picture. The physicians had been paid through a series of intermediaries, wealthy merchants who'd received large sums from an anonymous patron. The money had been moved carefully, laundered through legitimate business transactions. But Corwin was good at his job. He found the patterns. The timing, the way every payment had come from accounts connected to a single noble house, House Ashford, Lady Morwenna's family. That discovery opened a door to something bigger. House Ashford had been struggling financially for years, their lands producing less, their debts mounting. Then suddenly, 6 months ago, those debts had been paid off. All of them. By an anonymous benefactor who'd asked for nothing in return. Except Morwenna had started spending significantly more time with Prince Malric after that. Celine brought this information to one of their private meetings, laying out what she'd learned. It's circumstantial, not enough for a conviction, but it's a connection. Draven studied the documents spread across his desk. His jaw was tight with controlled fury. Malric's been sleeping with her. I've seen them together at court functions. Always careful, always proper. But the way they look at each other, he's been building alliances. Celine's mind was racing ahead, paying off noble houses in exchange for loyalty. Morwenna's just one of many. If we dig deeper, we'll probably find more, which means when he makes his move, he won't be alone. Draven's hands clenched into fists. He's been planning a coup. Not just my death, a complete takeover. The realization hit them both at the same time. This wasn't about inheritance or impatience. Malric wasn't waiting for his brother to die naturally. He was positioning himself to seize power while Draven was still alive, using the curse as justification. The Mad King who needed to be removed for the good of the Empire. The tragic necessity of putting down a monster before it destroyed everything. It was brilliant, ruthless. And it would have worked if the physicians hadn't lost their nerve. We need to move faster. Draven stood abruptly, pacing to the window. A month isn't enough. If Malric's already this far along, then we force his hand. Celine's voice was sharp. We make him think you're close to losing control completely. Stage something public, violent, something that makes his allies think the time to act is now. You want me to pretend to go feral in front of the entire court? I want you to give Malric enough rope to hang himself. Celine met his gaze. He's been patient this long because he thinks the curse will do the work for him. But if he believes you're about to transform in a way that can't be hidden, that you're becoming a liability he can't control, he'll have to move immediately, before he's completely ready. And we'll be waiting. Draven's eyes glittered. It's risky. Everything we're doing is risky. Celine's expression hardened, but it's better than waiting for him to strike when we're not prepared. Draven studied her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, with something that might have been gratitude or fear or both. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Can it be both? His laugh was short but genuine, the first real laugh she'd heard from him in weeks. Maybe. They spent the rest of the evening planning. It would have to be at the next state dinner, a public event with all the major nobles present. Draven would stage a loss of control, nothing too dramatic, nothing that would actually hurt anyone, but enough to make it look like the curse was finally winning. Enough to make Malric believe the moment had come. And then they'd wait to see who moved against the king. Mas. The state dinner was 3 days away when everything fell apart. Celine was in the palace library, researching noble families connected to House Ashford when Mira found her. The servant girl looked terrified, her face pale, her hands shaking as she pressed a folded paper into Celine's hands. My lady, a man gave this to me in the market, said it was urgent, for you only. Celine unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, rushed, and barely legible. They know you're investigating. Get out of the palace, tonight. They're coming for you. Her blood went cold. Who gave you this? I don't know, my lady. He was wearing a cloak. He left before I could ask questions. Mira's voice cracked, but he looked scared, really scared. Celine's mind raced. This could be a trap, a way to flush her out into the open where she'd be easier to eliminate. But it could also be genuine, a warning from someone who'd seen too much and still had enough conscience to try to save her. Either way, staying in the library suddenly felt like standing in the center of a target. Thank you, Mira. Celine kept her voice calm even though her heart was hammering. Go back to your duties. Don't tell anyone about this. Understand? Yes, my lady. The girl fled, and Celine stood there staring at the note. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to find Draven, to find Corwin, to get somewhere safe and defensible. But if Malric's people were already moving, if they'd discovered the investigation, then there might not be anywhere safe left in this palace. She needed to warn Draven. Now. Celine left the library and headed for the king's chambers, moving quickly, but not running. Running would attract attention. Running would tell anyone watching that she knew something was wrong. So she walked with purpose, head high, like she had every right to be there. The hallways were too quiet. That was the first warning sign. Usually at this hour, there were servants moving through the corridors, guards at their posts, nobles heading to various appointments. But today, the halls were almost empty, like someone had cleared them deliberately, like someone wanted privacy for what came next. Celine's hand moved to the small knife she'd started carrying after the first week in the palace. It wouldn't stop a trained assassin, but it was better than nothing. Her fingers closed around the hilt as she turned a corner and nearly collided with Prince Malric. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, flanked by 4 guards she didn't recognize. Not royal guards, private men. Hired swords with cold eyes and ready weapons. Malric smiled.
Lady Virel, how convenient. I was just coming to find you. Celine's grip tightened on the knife. Your Highness, I'm late for a meeting with the king. If you'll excuse me. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Malric's voice was pleasant, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. You see, we've learned some rather disturbing information. It seems you've been spreading rumors about me. Accusations of treason, conspiracy. Very serious charges.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. Malric stepped closer, and the guards moved with him, forming a loose circle. You've been investigating the physicians, following money trails, asking questions about payments and noble alliances. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Celine's mind raced, looking for exits. The hallway had 2. Behind her, the way she'd come. Ahead, blocked by Malric and his men, 4 against 1. 5 if Malric was armed. She couldn't fight her way out, couldn't outrun them. She was trapped, and Malric knew it. Here's what's going to happen. His voice dropped to something colder. You're going to disappear. A tragic accident. A noblewoman who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. My brother will mourn you, of course, might even rage for a few days. But ultimately, he'll move on, because he has bigger problems than one dead woman. You're making a mistake. Celine kept her voice steady, even as terror clawed at her chest. The king knows about the poisoning. He knows you're responsible. Killing me won't change that. The king knows what his diseased mind tells him. Malric's smile widened, and when he transforms tonight, when he loses control and attacks the guard sent to protect him, when he has to be put down like the animal he's become, no one will question it. Everyone's been expecting it for years. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The dinner in 3 days. That had been a distraction. Malric wasn't going to wait. He was making his move tonight, and he'd already planned Draven's death, probably had guards waiting to provoke the transformation, to create a situation where killing the king looked like the only option. And she'd walked right into his hands before she could warn anyone. One of the guards stepped forward, drawing a blade. Celine pulled her knife, knowing it was futile, but refusing to go down without a fight. If this was the end, she'd at least make them work for it. The guard lunged. Celine moved, muscle memory from self-defense training taking over. She sidestepped, slashed at his arm, felt the blade connect. The guard cursed, backing off. And for one brilliant second, Celine thought she might actually survive this. Then something slammed into the back of her head, and the world went black. Consciousness returned in fragments. Pain first, sharp and nauseating at the base of her skull. Then sound. Voices arguing somewhere close, then the sensation of cold stone against her cheek. Celine opened her eyes and immediately regretted it. The room spun violently. She was lying on a floor in near darkness, her hands bound behind her back, her head throbbing with every heartbeat. She tried to sit up and nearly vomited from the effort. Slowly, carefully, she managed to get herself upright and look around. She was in some kind of storage room. No windows. One door. Crates and barrels stacked against the walls. And sitting across from her, also bound, was Lord Corwin. The advisor looked worse than she felt. Blood crusted on his temple. His clothes were torn. But his eyes were sharp and alert when they met hers. Lady Virel. His voice was hoarse. I was hoping you'd gotten away. What happened? They came for me an hour after you left the king's study. Corwin's expression was grim. Malric's men. They knew everything. About the investigation. About the dinner plan. Everything. Someone talked. Celine's mind was starting to clear, thinking past the pain. But who? The only people who knew were us and the king, Corwin finished, which means either one of us was betrayed or they've been listening the entire time. Selene's stomach dropped. The king's study, his private chambers. What if Malric had people inside the walls, servants loyal to him instead of Draven, people who'd been reporting every conversation, every plan? It would explain how Malric always seemed one step ahead. It would also mean they'd lost before they'd even started playing. Where's Draven? Selene tried to keep the panic out of her voice. Is he alive? For now. Corwin's jaw clenched. But Malric's planning something for tonight. I heard the guards talking. Something about the transformation chamber. About making sure the king doesn't survive the night. Selene's blood ran cold. They were going to kill him during the transformation. When he was at his most vulnerable. When killing him could be written off as self-defense against a raging beast. We have to stop them. We're bound and locked in a basement. Corwin's voice was bitter. I don't see how... The door opened. Malric walked in, flanked by 2 guards. He looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place, not a hint of guilt or uncertainty in his expression. He studied them both like they were insects pinned to a board. I wanted to speak with you before the end. His voice was conversational. To explain. Because I'm not a monster, despite what you might think. You're killing your own brother. Selene's voice was raw with fury. What would you call that? Mercy. Malric's expression didn't change. Draven is suffering every day, every transformation. He's not living. He's just dying slowly in the most agonizing way possible. What I've been doing is ending that suffering, giving him peace, by poisoning him, by making it worse, by ensuring it happens quickly instead of drawing out for years. Malric crouched down to her eye level. You think you were helping him. You think your voice and your presence were saving him, but all you did was prolong his agony. Make him hope when there was no hope to be had. That's crueler than anything I've done. The words hit like a physical blow, because part of Selene wondered if he was right. Had she been helping Draven or just extending his suffering? Had her refusal to accept the inevitable made things worse instead of better? No. She pushed the thought away. What Malric had done, the poisoning and the betrayal and the assassination plot, that wasn't mercy. That was ambition dressed up in noble language. That was a man willing to murder his own blood to claim a crown. You're lying to yourself. Selene met his gaze. You don't care about Draven's suffering. You care about the throne, about power, and you're willing to destroy anyone who stands in your way. Malric's smile was thin. Believe what you want. In a few hours, it won't matter. Draven will be dead, you'll be dead, and the Empire will have a king who can actually rule without turning into a monster every night. He stood brushing off his knees. The guards will come for you when it's time. I suggest you make peace with whatever you need to. Dying with regrets is such a waste. Then he left, closing the door behind him with a finality that felt like a grave being sealed. Selene and Corwin sat in the dark, bound and helpless, while somewhere above them Draven prepared for a transformation that would end with his death. Everything they'd fought for, every risk they'd taken, had led to this. Trapped and powerless while the man they'd tried to save walked into an execution. This was what betrayal looked like. Not a dramatic confrontation or a grand reveal, just cold efficiency and careful planning. Just the people closest to you deciding you were worth more dead than alive. Selene thought about the night she'd first entered the transformation chamber, the way the beast had looked at her with those golden eyes, the way Draven had fought so hard to hold on to his humanity, how desperate he'd been for someone to see him as more than the monster he was becoming. She'd promised to stay, to help, to be his anchor, and now she was going to die in this basement while he died alone, believing she'd abandoned him. The unfairness of it burned worse than any physical pain. They'd been so close to exposing Malric, so close to saving Draven, and it had all fallen apart because they'd trusted the wrong people and underestimated how deep the betrayal ran. Selene closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of failure, of knowing that her best hadn't been enough, that sometimes courage and determination weren't sufficient when you were fighting against people who had no honor and no limits. Then she opened her eyes and started working on the ropes around her wrists, because even if this was the end, even if they were both going to die tonight, she'd be damned if she went quietly. If there was even the smallest chance of getting free, of warning Draven, of stopping Malric's coup, she had to take it, no matter how impossible it seemed. The ropes were old hemp, rough enough to tear skin but thick enough to hold. Celine worked her wrists against the fibers, ignoring the burn, ignoring the way blood started to slick her hands. Pain was irrelevant. Time was running out with every second that ticked past, and if she didn't get free, Draven would walk into that chamber alone and never walk out. Corwin watched her from across the dim storage room, his own bonds still secure. His face was a mask of resignation, the kind that came from spending decades at court and learning exactly how these stories ended. People like them didn't escape, didn't win. They just died quietly in basements while the powerful rewrote history upstairs. But Celine had never been good at accepting defeat, had never learned the lesson that some fights weren't worth fighting because the outcome was already decided. Maybe that made her stupid, maybe it made her dangerous. Right now, she didn't care which. The rope was loosening, not much, but enough that she could feel it shifting against her wrists. She twisted harder, grinding the hemp against the sharp edge of a nail protruding from a nearby crate. The metal bit into the fibers, fraying them strand by strand. Lady Viral. Corwin's voice was quiet. Even if you get free, there are guards outside that door. You won't make it 10 feet. Then I'll make it 9. Celine's jaw was clenched tight enough to ache. And then I'll fight for the 10th. You'll die. Probably. The rope gave a little more. She could almost slip one hand through now. But I'll die trying instead of waiting. Something shifted in Corwin's expression. Not hope, exactly. More like the memory of what hope used to feel like before years of political survival had beaten it out of him. He looked at her like she was something from another time, when people still believed courage mattered more than calculation. If you get out, Corwin said slowly, you need to go straight to the transformation chamber. Don't stop. Don't fight anyone unless you absolutely have to. Malric's men will be concentrated there, waiting for the king to change. That's where you're needed most. Celine nodded, still working the rope. What about you? I'll manage. If you can get these bonds off me after you're free, I'll create a distraction. Buy you time. Corwin's smile was grim. I'm an old man, Lady Viral. My usefulness to the Empire has always been limited, but I can still make noise when it counts. You're not dying in this basement. Neither are you. So stop talking and finish freeing yourself. Celine twisted her wrists one final time and felt the rope give way completely. Her hand slipped free, raw and bleeding, but functional. She immediately went to work on Corwin's bonds, fingers clumsy with urgency but determined. The knots were tighter, more complex, but whoever had tied them hadn't expected a woman with nothing left to lose and bloody determination in place of sense. It took 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. Finally, Corwin's hands came free. He flexed his fingers, wincing, then moved to the door. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening. 2 guards outside, maybe 3. They're talking, not paying much attention. His eyes met Celine's. When I open this door, I'm going to collapse. Play sick, dying. They'll come in to check, and that's when you move. Understand. Celine picked up a piece of broken crate, testing the weight. The wood was old but solid, heavy enough to do damage if she swung it right. I understand. Don't hesitate. Corwin's voice was hard. You hesitate, you die. You die, the king dies. So you hit first, hit hard, and you run. There was something almost paternal in the way he said it, like he was giving advice to a daughter heading into battle. Celine nodded once, then positioned herself behind the door where she wouldn't be immediately visible when it opened. Corwin took a breath, steadying himself. Then he pounded on the door with both fists and let out a scream that sounded convincingly like a man dying in agony. The effect was immediate. She heard cursing outside, the scrape of a key in the lock. The door swung open and a guard stepped inside, torch held high, looking for the source of the noise. He saw Corwin on the floor, convulsing. Didn't see Celine behind the door until the makeshift club smashed into the side of his head. He went down hard, unconscious before he hit the ground. The second guard was faster. He lunged through the doorway, blade already drawn, and Celine barely managed to deflect the strike with the piece of wood. The sword bit deep into the crate fragment, splitting it. She twisted, yanking the weapon from his grip, and Corwin swept the man's legs out from under him. The guard hit the floor, and Celine brought the torch down on his skull. He stopped moving. Silence. Heavy breathing. the acrid smell of burning torch oil. Celine grabbed the fallen sword, testing its weight. Not ideal, but better than a piece of wood. Corwin took the other guard's blade, his movements sharp despite his age. Go. His voice was urgent. I'll follow and raise hell in the east wing. Draw as many guards away from the chamber as possible. Celine met his eyes. Thank you. Thank me by keeping that stubborn fool of a king alive. Corwin's expression softened slightly. He deserves better than dying alone because his own brother couldn't stand to see him happy. Then Corwin was gone, moving down the corridor in the opposite direction, and Celine was running. Her bare feet slapped against cold stone as she raced through the underbelly of the palace, heading for the reinforced chamber where Draven would be preparing for the transformation that Malric had turned into an execution. The hallways were darker than she remembered, fewer torches lit, fewer servants moving through the passages. Malric had cleared the area, making sure there would be no witnesses to what happened tonight. No one to question why the king's personal guards had been forced to kill him, no one to see the setup. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind her, she heard shouting. Corwin making good on his promise to create chaos. The sound of running feet heading in the wrong direction, away from where she needed to be. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with a patrol. 3 guards in Malric's colors, not the royal crest. Hired men with dead eyes and no loyalty except to gold. They saw her, saw the sword, saw the blood on her hands and the wild desperation in her eyes. The first one moved to block her path. Stop right there. Celine didn't slow down. She hit him like a battering ram, all momentum and reckless fury. The sword came up, clumsy but fast, catching him across the forearm. He screamed, stumbling back. The second guard lunged, and Celine barely twisted away from the blade. It scored a burning line across her ribs, shallow but painful enough to make her gasp. She couldn't beat them in a straight fight. Didn't have the training or the strength, but she had something they didn't. She had everything to lose and nothing left to fear. That made her dangerous in a way that hired swords couldn't match. Celine feinted left, then dove right, rolling under a wild swing. She came up behind them and ran. Just ran, leaving them cursing and chasing. But she had a head start now and she knew where she was going. They'd have to catch her first. The transformation chamber was at the end of the north corridor. Celine could see the heavy iron door ahead, flanked by 4 guards. Not hired men. Royal guards. People who should have been protecting the king but had been bought or threatened or convinced that what they were about to do was necessary. One of them saw her coming. His eyes widened. Lady Varel, you shouldn't be here. Where's the king? Celine didn't slow down, didn't lower the sword. Let me through. We have orders. No one enters until after the transformation. The guard's hand moved to his weapon, but there was uncertainty in his face. Uncertainty she could use. Your orders are from a traitor. Celine's voice rang out, loud enough for all of them to hear. Prince Malric has been poisoning the king for months. He's planning a coup. And if you let him die tonight, you're accomplices to regicide. The guards exchanged glances, doubt creeping in. But doubt wasn't enough. They'd been positioned here for a reason, given instructions that came with gold and promises. They wouldn't step aside just because a desperate woman with a sword told them to. Celine was still calculating her next move when the door behind the guards exploded outward. Not opened. Exploded. The heavy iron buckled and tore like paper, and through the gap came something that wasn't entirely human anymore. 7 feet of muscle and rage, eyes already burning gold, transformation half complete. Draven Kalor, caught between man and beast, and absolutely losing his mind. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known this was a trap. The guards scattered, self-preservation overriding orders. Draven's roar shook the corridor, a sound that bypassed rational thought and went straight to primal terror. This was what the Empire feared. This was the monster that haunted nightmares and justified every brutal decision the king had ever made. This was the Alpha Curse at its most terrifying. Draven's eyes locked onto the fleeing guards, and Celine saw the exact moment he decided they were threats. Saw his muscles coil, preparing to pounce. Draven. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Don't! The beast's head snapped toward her. For one horrible second, she thought he wouldn't recognize her, thought the transformation had progressed too far, and she was about to become just another target for the rage consuming him. Then his eyes cleared. Just slightly. Just enough.
Celine. His voice was barely human, scraped raw. They were going to kill me. I know. She moved closer slowly, hands visible, non-threatening despite the sword. Malric set a trap. But I'm here now. We're getting you out. Can't control it. Draven's hands were shaking, claws extending and retracting with each word. Too angry. Too far gone. Then be angry. Celine stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the way his chest heaved with each breath. Close enough to smell the blood and sweat and the wild thing trying to break free. But be angry at the right people. Malric's upstairs right now, probably celebrating your death. Don't give him the satisfaction. The beast inside him howled. She could see it in the way Draven's spine arched, the way his jaw elongated another inch. He was losing the battle, giving ground to the curse with every second, but he was still listening, still trying to hold on. Celine made a decision that would either save them both or get her killed in the next 5 seconds. She closed the distance between them and grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. You are not a monster. You are not your curse. You are Draven Kalor, king of Varethis, and you do not give up. Especially not now. Especially not when your brother thinks he's won. His claws came up, wrapping around her wrists. Not squeezing, not yet. But the threat was there, immediate and terrifying. One wrong word and those claws would close, and that would be the end of it. Celine held his gaze. I'm not afraid of you. I never have been. And right now the Empire needs you angry, needs you dangerous. So stop fighting what you are and use it. Something shifted in his expression. The gold in his eyes flickered, and behind it she saw calculation. Strategy. The king reasserting control over the beast, not by suppressing it, but by directing it. Draven's voice came out as a growl. Where is he? The throne room. Celine's pulse was racing, but her voice stayed steady. He's gathering his allies, preparing to announce your death and claim the crown. Then we're going to make an entrance. Draven released her wrists and turned toward the corridor. His movement was predatory, controlled violence barely leashed. Anyone who stands with him dies. No mercy, no hesitation. Agreed. Celine raised the sword she'd taken. But we do this smart. We get evidence first, proof that forces his allies to abandon him. There's no time for evidence. Draven was already moving, his massive frame filling the hallway. This ends tonight. They made their way through the palace like a storm given human form. Draven in front, half transformed and radiating murder. Celine behind him, sword ready, eyes scanning for threats. They encountered resistance twice. Guards loyal to Malric who tried to stop them. Draven tore through them like they were made of paper, and Celine tried very hard not to look at what he left behind. This was what he'd been afraid of. This was the monster everyone warned about. The thing that killed without thought or mercy when the curse took hold. But watching him now, Celine realized something crucial. He wasn't killing randomly, wasn't attacking everything that moved. He was making choices, calculating threats, protecting her while eliminating anyone who tried to stop them. The man was still there, still in control, just willing to be brutal in ways he usually held back. They burst into the throne room like an apocalypse given form, and the scene that greeted them confirmed every suspicion they'd had. Malric stood at the base of the throne, surrounded by at least 20 nobles in full formal dress. Lady Morwenna, Lord Tybalt, a dozen others whose names Celine couldn't remember, but whose faces she recognized from court. The inner circle. The ones who'd been bought or convinced that removing Draven was necessary for the Empire's survival. They were mid-celebration, wine flowing, congratulations being exchanged, the mood of people who thought they'd just pulled off the perfect coup. Then they saw what came through the door, and the celebration died. Draven, in full transformation, eyes burning gold, claws dripping blood. And beside him, Celine Virel, alive when she should have been dead, holding a sword and looking ready to use it. The silence was absolute. Malric recovered first, his face cycling through shock, rage, and calculation in the space of 2 seconds. Then he smiled, and it was the coldest thing Celine had ever seen. Brother. His voice carried across the throne room, perfectly modulated. I see the reports of your death were premature, the reports you ordered. Draven's voice was barely human, but every word was clear. The poisoning you arranged, the trap you set. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? I don't know what you're talking about. Malric's hands spread wide, the picture of innocence. You're clearly not well. The curse is affecting your judgment. Perhaps we should get you to your physicians, the physicians you paid to kill me. Draven took a step forward, and half the nobles took a step back. 6 months of poison, Malric. 6 months of making my transformations worse while you positioned yourself to take the throne. Prove it. Malric's voice was sharp. You have accusations but no evidence, just paranoid delusions from a dying king who's losing his mind to a curse. I have testimony from the physicians. Corwin's voice rang out from the back of the room. He limped forward, bloodied but alive, holding a sheaf of papers. Confessions, financial records. Payments from House Ashford trace back to accounts you control. It's all here. Malric's mask slipped. Just for a second, but it was enough. Celine saw the flash of genuine fear before he got himself under control. Forgeries. His voice was still steady, but there was an edge now. My brother is clearly desperate. He's dying, and he knows it. So he's created this elaborate conspiracy to avoid the inevitable. The nobles were watching, calculating. Some looked convinced by Malric's words. Others looked uncertain. A few looked outright terrified, probably wondering if they'd backed the wrong brother and were about to pay for it. Draven took another step forward. Let's simplify this. Anyone standing with Malric right now, anyone who helped him poison me or planned to help him seize the throne, has one chance to leave. Walk out that door and I'll consider your involvement coercion. Stay, and you're complicit in treason. It was a brutal ultimatum, and it split the room immediately. 3 nobles broke and ran, then 5 more. Then a flood, people scrambling for the exits as they realized the mad king they'd written off was very much alive and very much capable of tearing them apart. Within 30 seconds, only 6 people remained with Malric. Lady Morwenna and 5 hardened fighters who clearly weren't nobles at all. Hired killers dressed in formal clothes. Insurance in case things went wrong. Things had gone very wrong. Malric's expression settled into something cold and final. You always were too sentimental, brother. Too concerned with justice and mercy and doing things the right way. That's why you were always going to fail, and you were always too ambitious. Draven's claws extended fully, too willing to sacrifice anyone who stood between you and power, including your own blood. You were already dead. Malric's voice rose, angry now. The curse was killing you. All I did was speed up the inevitable, spare you years of suffering, spare the Empire years of uncertainty. You didn't spare me anything. You tortured me. Draven's voice was deadly quiet. You made every transformation agony, made me think I was losing control when I was fighting poison and betrayal both. And you did it because you couldn't wait. Couldn't let me have even a few more years of life. A few more years of you tearing this empire apart. Malric gestured wildly. Look at yourself. You're a monster. You can barely hold human form. How long before you lose control in front of the entire court? How long before you slaughter innocents because the beast takes over? I've never killed an innocent. Draven took another step. Every person I've executed in beast form was a threat, an enemy, someone who tried to harm the Empire. But you've killed loyalty, trust, the bond between brothers, and that makes you more monstrous than I could ever be. The hired killers moved, fanning out in a practiced formation. Malric stepped back, letting them form a barrier between him and his brother. These men have orders. If you attack me, they'll kill the girl. You might survive. She won't. Celine's blood ran cold as 3 of the killers shifted their focus to her. She tightened her grip on the sword, knowing it wouldn't be enough. She was one woman with barely any combat training against professionals who killed for gold, but she'd faced the beast and survived. She'd looked death in the eye more than once in the past few weeks, and she'd be damned if she let Malric use her as leverage now. Try it. Her voice was steady. See how far you get before the king tears you apart. Malric's smile was thin. Always so brave, so noble. That's what I never understood about you, Lady Varel. Why you'd throw your life away for a dying king? What did you think would happen? That you'd save him with the power of love or some fairy tale nonsense? I threw my life away for something worth dying for. Celine met his gaze. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a blade. Malric's expression twisted into something ugly, all pretense of civility finally stripped away.
This was who he really was underneath the charm and the political savvy. Just a man willing to destroy anything in his path to get what he wanted. Kill them both. His voice was flat. Make it look like the beast went feral and attacked everyone in reach. No survivors, no witnesses. The killers moved as one, professional and efficient. 3 toward Celine, 3 toward Draven. Morwenna pulled a dagger from somewhere in her dress, positioning herself near the throne to cut off escape routes. This was it. The moment where everything either came together or fell completely apart. Draven's transformation completed in a surge of violence that shook the room. The last traces of humanity vanished from his face, replaced by the full manifestation of the Alpha Curse. He was enormous now, powerful beyond anything human. And for the first time since she'd known him, Celine saw him stop fighting it, saw him embrace what he was and turn it into a weapon. The beast launched itself at the killers with speed that defied physics. Claws tore through armor like it was cloth. One killer went down screaming, then another. Blood sprayed across marble floors as Draven proved exactly why the curse had made his bloodline unstoppable for generations. Celine didn't watch. She had her own fight. The 3 killers coming for her moved with lethal precision, spreading out to attack from multiple angles. She backed toward a pillar, trying to limit the directions they could come from. The first one lunged. Celine parried desperately, the impact jarring her arms. The second came from the side, forcing her to twist away. She felt a blade score across her shoulder, hot pain blooming. The third was circling, waiting for an opening. She was outmatched, outskilled, and running out of time. Then one of the killers simply stopped, looking down at the claws protruding from his chest. Draven had moved so fast she hadn't seen it, tearing through his own opponents to reach hers. The killer collapsed, and the beast turned on the remaining 2 with murder in its golden eyes. They ran, professionals recognizing a losing fight and choosing survival over gold. They made it 3 steps before Draven caught them. The sounds that followed would haunt Celine's nightmares, but she forced herself to look away, to focus on Malric, who was backing toward a side door, Morwenna at his side. No. Celine started forward, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. You don't get to run. Malric's hand was on the door handle. This isn't over. The Empire won't accept a monster as king. Today might be yours, but tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll be in chains or dead. Celine's voice was ice. Your choice. He hesitated, just for a second, then pulled the door open and disappeared through it, Morwenna following. Celine started to chase, but a massive clawed hand caught her arm, stopping her. Draven stood there, covered in blood, breathing hard. His eyes were still golden, still more beast than man. But the hand on her arm was careful, controlled, not hurting her despite the carnage he'd just unleashed. Let him go. His voice was gravel and broken glass. We have what we need. He'll regroup, try again, and we'll be ready. Draven's grip tightened slightly. But right now you're hurt and I'm barely holding on. We secure the palace first, then we hunt. Celine wanted to argue, wanted to chase Malric down and end this before he had time to spin the narrative or build new alliances. But Draven was right. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, her shoulder was screaming, and the king was 1 heartbeat away from losing control completely. They'd won the battle, but the war was just beginning, and somewhere in the palace, Malric was already planning his next move. The throne room looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood pooled across marble floors that had witnessed centuries of ceremony and power. Bodies of hired killers lay where they'd fallen, testimony to what happened when ambition met an alpha curse that had finally stopped apologizing for existing. The air was thick with the copper smell of violence and the sharper scent of fear that still lingered even though the fight was over. Celine stood in the center of it all, one hand pressed to the bleeding wound on her shoulder, the other still gripping the sword she'd taken from a guard who'd made the mistake of standing between her and survival. Her legs were shaking, had been shaking for the past 5 minutes, but she refused to sit down, refused to show weakness when the Empire was watching to see if their king had truly won or just postponed the inevitable. Draven was across the room, surrounded by the royal guards who'd remained loyal, the ones who'd refused Malric's gold or threats. Lord Corwin stood beside him, directing men to secure the palace and find every noble who'd fled when the fighting started. The transformation was receding slowly, Draven's features shifting back toward human with visible effort. His hands were still clawed, his eyes still burned gold, but his voice was his own again when he spoke. giving orders with the kind of brutal clarity that reminded everyone why he'd conquered 12 kingdoms before the curse had tried to take everything away. He caught her watching, and something passed between them. Not words, just acknowledgement. They'd survived. Both of them. Against odds that should have crushed them into nothing, but survival wasn't victory. Not yet. Not while Malric was still breathing and planning his next move. Your Majesty. One of the guards approached, blood-spattered and grim. We've secured the East Wing and the royal quarters. No sign of Prince Malric or Lady Morwenna. They're gone. Draven's jaw clenched hard enough that Celine heard teeth grind even from across the room. Seal the gates. No one leaves the capital. I want every guard, every soldier, every loyal sword searching for my brother. And when you find him, bring him to me alive. The guard hesitated. Your Majesty, if he resists, Ishat, then you break whatever you need to break to bring him back breathing. Draven's voice dropped to something dangerous. But he stands trial. He answers for what he's done in front of the entire empire. I won't give him the mercy of a quick death in some back alley. The guard saluted and left. Draven turned to Corwin, and Celine saw the exhaustion in every line of his body. The fight had cost him, not just physically, but something deeper. The kind of cost that came from realizing the person who should have stood beside you had been the one holding the knife aimed at your back. How many fled? Draven's voice was rough. 17 nobles in total. Corwin consulted a hastily scrawled list. Most minor houses. A few with real influence. They scattered when the fighting started. Some might have been coerced, but others were clearly conspirators. I want names, families, assets. Draven's expression was carved from stone. Anyone who helped Malric pays. Their lands, their titles, their gold, everything gets stripped and redistributed to houses that stayed loyal. That will cause upheaval. Corwin's tone was careful. Some of those families have held their positions for generations. Then they should have remembered what loyalty means. Draven's eyes were cold. I've been merciful too long. Let ambition fester because I thought stability mattered more than justice. That ends tonight. The Empire will know that betraying the crown has consequences that outlast lifetimes. It was the voice of a king who'd been pushed past the breaking point, who'd learned that mercy without teeth was just another word for weakness. Celine understood it even as part of her recoiled from the brutality. This was what ruling looked like when you'd been poisoned by your own blood, when trust became a luxury you couldn't afford, when the only way to survive was to make examples so brutal that no one would dare try again. But she also saw the cost in Draven's eyes, the way something inside him had broken when Malric had revealed the depth of his betrayal. Kings weren't supposed to grieve, weren't supposed to feel the sting of family turning against them. They were supposed to be above it, cold and calculating and willing to sacrifice anything for the Empire's stability. But Draven had never been that kind of king. He'd felt every loss, every necessary cruelty, every choice that required him to be monster instead of man, and it had been eating him alive long before the curse accelerated the process. Your Majesty. Celine's voice cut through the planning. You're bleeding. Draven looked down at himself, seeming to notice for the first time the gashes across his torso. Claws marks from the killers who'd gotten close enough to land hits before dying. They were already healing, flesh knitting back together with unnatural speed. The curse's one gift, the thing that kept him functional when any normal man would have bled out. It'll heal. His tone dismissed it. We have more important... It'll heal faster if you let someone treat it properly. Celine moved toward him, ignoring the way her own shoulder screamed in protest. And you need to conserve energy. The transformation isn't complete. You're still half shifted. I'm fine. You're exhausted. Celine stopped in front of him, close enough to see the way his hands trembled slightly, close enough to see the gold still flickering in his irises. You fought poison and betrayal for months, survived an assassination attempt, killed 6 trained fighters while barely holding on to your humanity. You're not fine. You're running on rage and adrenaline, and when that runs out, you're going to collapse. The guards were watching. Corwin was watching. Half the throne room was watching this woman tell the king he was wrong, waiting to see if he'd accept it or lash out. Draven stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then, impossibly, he nodded. Get the physicians, the ones who weren't involved in the conspiracy.
Draven's voice was directed at Corwin, but his eyes stayed on Celine. Have them treat Lady Viral first, then me. Your Majesty. That's an order. The steel was back in his voice. She took a blade meant for me. Her wounds get priority. Celine wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about medical logic. This was about guilt, about the fact that she'd nearly died because she'd chosen to stand beside him when running would have been smarter. About the weight of watching someone sacrifice themselves for you when you'd spent years believing you weren't worth saving. So she let them lead her to a side chamber where physicians with shaking hands cleaned and stitched her wounds while asking no questions about what had happened in the throne room. Let them wrap her shoulder and give her something bitter for the pain. And when she returned to find Draven, he was sitting on the steps of his throne, human again, bandaged and exhausted and looking more alone than anyone should ever look while wearing a crown. The guards had withdrawn to give him space. Corwin was gone, probably coordinating the search for Malric. It was just Draven and Celine and the wreckage of a night that had rewritten the future of an empire. Celine sat beside him on the steps. Neither spoke for a long moment, just sat there, breathing, letting the reality of survival settle into their bones. I should have seen it sooner. Draven's voice was quiet, raw, the poisoning, the conspiracy. I was so focused on fighting the curse that I didn't notice the knife my own brother was sharpening. You were too busy trying not to kill everyone around you. Celine's tone was gentle. That doesn't leave much energy for paranoia. A king should always be paranoid. His laugh was bitter. That's the job. Trust no one. Question everything. Rule through fear because loyalty is just a transaction waiting to be bought by a higher bidder. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. Draven stared at the blood-stained floor. I built this empire on the promise of strength and order, conquered kingdoms, executed traitors, made myself into something people feared more than death, and it still wasn't enough. My own brother still thought he could take me down, still convinced half the court that I was the problem. Celine wanted to tell him he was wrong, that the nobles who'd fled were cowards and Malric was a monster, and none of this was his fault. But those would be comfortable lies, and Draven didn't need comfort. He needed truth, however brutal it was. You ruled through fear because fear was all you had left. Celine kept her voice steady. The curse took everything else. Your ability to be close to people. Your trust. Your hope. So you leaned into the monster because at least monsters don't get hurt when people betray them. And look where it got me. Draven's voice was hollow. Alone on a throne with a brother who wants me dead and an empire that's waiting for me to lose control so they can put me down. You're not alone. Celine met his eyes. I'm still here. Corwin's still here. There are people who stayed loyal even when running would have been easier. That has to count for something. Why? The question came out rough. Why did you stay? You could have run that first night, could have left me in that chamber to tear myself apart. Instead, you walked into hell every night for weeks, risking your life for a dying king who had nothing to offer you except proximity to violence. Because you were worth saving. Celine's voice was fierce. Not the king, not the empire. You. The man who intervened to save a servant girl he didn't know, who fought through poison and madness to hold on to his humanity, who hated what he was becoming but kept trying anyway because giving up meant letting the monster win. The monster did win. Look at what I did tonight. Draven's hands clenched. I tore men apart, killed without hesitation or mercy. I became exactly what everyone's been afraid of. You became what you needed to be to survive. There's a difference. Celine shifted closer. Monsters kill because they enjoy it. You killed because men were trying to murder you and the people you're responsible for. That's not madness. That's just war. Draven was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm tired, Celine. Tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid every night that I'll wake up covered in innocent blood. Tired of watching people I care about risk everything because I can't control my own curse. Then stop fighting it. The words came out before Celine could stop them. Stop trying to be the king everyone expects. Stop pretending you're not suffering. Stop forcing yourself to be invincible when you're barely holding on. And what happens when I show weakness? Draven's laugh was broken. The empire fractures. Enemies move against us. Everything I've built collapses because the king isn't strong enough to hold it together. Or maybe the empire gets stronger because the king is finally honest. Celine reached over and took his hand, the one that was still partially clawed, still marked by the curse he'd stopped trying to hide. You've been so busy being what everyone needed that you forgot you're allowed to be human, allowed to hurt and heal and ask for help. Kings don't ask for help. This one does. Or he should. Celine's grip tightened. You saved me tonight. Let me return the favor. Let someone stand beside you instead of behind you. Draven looked at their joined hands like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing, like the concept of someone choosing to hold on to him instead of pulling away was so foreign he didn't have words for it. You're going to get yourself killed. His voice was rough with something that might have been fear or hope, or both. Probably. Celine smiled, tired and real. But I'd rather die standing next to you than live safely pretending I didn't see someone worth fighting for. The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid, everything they'd survived to reach this point. Then Draven's hand turned, fingers lacing through hers, and they sat there in the ruins of the throne room while the Empire held its breath and waited to see what came next. They found Malric 3 days later. He'd holed up in a safe house on the eastern edge of the capital, surrounded by the last remnants of his conspiracy. Lady Morwenna. A handful of minor nobles who'd committed too deeply to turn back. 15 hired swords who'd taken his gold and were too professional to abandon a contract even when it was clearly lost. The royal guards surrounded the building at dawn. Corwin had led the operation personally, coordinating with military precision to ensure no one escaped. By the time the sun was fully up, every exit was blocked, every window covered, every possible escape route severed. Draven had wanted to lead the assault himself, had wanted to tear through the walls and drag his brother out by force. But Selene had talked him down, reminded him that kings didn't risk themselves in raids when they had soldiers for that purpose, reminded him that what mattered now was justice, not revenge. So Draven waited in the palace war room surrounded by maps and reports, while Corwin's voice came through a messenger every 15 minutes with updates. The building is surrounded, no movement detected. We've sent in an envoy, offering terms of surrender. Prince Malric refuses to negotiate. He's demanding safe passage out of the Empire in exchange for standing down. Draven's response was flat. Denied. He surrenders unconditionally, or we storm the building. Your Majesty, there are innocents inside, servants, children. If we go in with force, then Malric should think about them before choosing to make a stand. Draven's voice was ice. He has 1 hour. After that, I don't care how many bodies we have to step over to get to him. The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Selene spent it pacing the war room, watching Draven sit perfectly still at the head of the table. He'd completed the transformation back to human, but the cost was visible in the tension of his shoulders. The curse wanted out, wanted to hunt, wanted to finish what had started in the throne room with blood and claws. But this had to be done right. Legal, public. If Draven gave in to the beast now, even to end his brother, it would confirm every fear the nobles had, would prove that the curse had won and the king was too far gone to rule justly. So he sat and waited, and forced himself to be human when every instinct screamed to be monster. The messenger burst through the door exactly 60 minutes after the ultimatum. Your Majesty, Prince Malric has surrendered. He's asking to speak with you personally before he's taken into custody. Denied. Draven stood. Bring him to the throne room, in chains, and make sure every noble in the capital knows to attend. I want witnesses. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. Malric was dragged into a throne room packed with nobles, soldiers, and citizens who'd somehow gotten word that history was being made. He looked smaller than Selene remembered, diminished. The charm and confidence that had made him dangerous were gone, replaced by the bitter resignation of a gambler who'd lost everything on one bad hand. He was chained, guarded by 8 men with weapons drawn, but he stood straight as they forced him to his knees before the throne, and when he looked up at his brother, there was no remorse in his eyes. Just cold calculation that had simply failed to account for one variable. Draven Kylor sat on the throne of Varithus, fully human but radiating a kind of controlled fury that made even the most jaded courtiers nervous. Selene stood to his right, position of honor, testimony to the fact that the woman who'd helped save the king now held influence that terrified half the room. Prince Malric Kalor Draven's voice carried across the throne room, flat and final. You stand accused of conspiracy, treason, attempted regicide, and the poisoning of your king. The evidence has been reviewed by the council. The testimony of the physicians has been heard. Do you deny these charges? Malric's smile was thin. Would it matter if I did? No. But I'm giving you the chance to speak, more than you gave me when you were slowly killing me. The barb hit home. Malric's expression flickered, something like shame passing across his features before being buried under defiance. I did what I thought was necessary. For the Empire. For the stability we've built.
You did it for power. Draven leaned forward slightly. Don't dress it up as noble sacrifice. You couldn't wait for me to die naturally, so you decided to speed things along. And when that wasn't enough, you planned a coup to seize the throne before the Empire could choose its own succession. The Empire would have chosen me anyway. Malric's voice rose. You're dying, Draven. Everyone knows it. The curse is winning. How long before you transform and can't come back? Before you slaughter innocence because the beast takes over? I was offering a solution before the problem became catastrophic, by poisoning me, by making sure the transformations got worse instead of better. Draven's hands gripped the armrests of the throne hard enough that wood creaked. You didn't want a solution. You wanted me to suffer, to break, to prove that I was the monster you needed me to be to justify taking everything. The throne room was silent. Every eye was on the two brothers, watching the final confrontation between the dying king and the ambitious prince who'd tried to hasten that death. I won't apologize for doing what you were too weak to do yourself. Malric's voice was bitter. You should have stepped down years ago, should have named me heir and let the Empire transition peacefully. Instead, you clung to power while the curse ate you alive, and now here we are. You've won. Congratulations. How long will that last? A year, 6 months. The moment you lose control, everything you're protecting falls apart anyway. Maybe. Draven's voice was quiet, dangerous. But that's not your decision to make. The crown doesn't pass because you're impatient. It passes when the king decides, or when the king falls. And I'm still standing. For now. Malric's eyes glittered, but we both know how this ends. Yes, we do. Draven stood and the throne room seemed to hold its breath. Prince Malric Kalor, for the crimes of treason and attempted regicide, I sentence you to exile, permanent. You will be stripped of title, lands, and name. You will be escorted to the northern border and released into the wastelands with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you ever set foot in this empire again, the sentence is death. No trial, no mercy, just an execution. The pronouncement landed like a hammer. Exile was worse than death in many ways. It meant erasure, being cut off from everything you'd ever known and forced to survive in territories where the Varithus name meant nothing, where a prince with no resources and no allies would either adapt or die, and no one would care which. Malric's face went pale. You're not even going to execute me, just going to throw me away like I'm nothing. You were willing to poison me for months, to torture me with a curse you made worse deliberately. Draven's voice was steel. Death would be too quick, too merciful. I want you to live with what you've done. Want you to spend every day in exile remembering that you threw away everything for a crown you never deserved. The guards moved forward, hauling Malric to his feet. He didn't resist, just looked at his brother with something that might have been hatred or regret or both. You'll regret this. His voice was low. When the curse finally takes you, when you wake up covered in blood and can't remember whose, you'll wish you'd let me end it quickly. Maybe. Draven's expression didn't change. But I'll die knowing I didn't let you win. Malric was dragged from the throne room, and the silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, one by one, the nobles began to kneel. Not out of fear this time, out of something that looked almost like respect. The king had faced betrayal from his own blood and responded with justice instead of slaughter, had been strong enough to show mercy even when rage would have been easier. It was the kind of moment that redefined reigns, that turned dying kings into legends. Celine watched Draven's face and saw no triumph, just exhaustion, just the hollow relief of surviving another day in a war that never truly ended. The weeks after Malric's exile were brutal in ways that had nothing to do with violence. The court had to be restructured. Houses that had conspired with the prince were stripped of lands and titles.
Loyalists were rewarded. New alliances were forged while old ones were tested under the weight of recent betrayal. Draven worked 18-hour days, meeting with advisors, hearing petitions, making the 1,000 small decisions that kept an empire functioning. And every night he transformed. But the pattern had changed. Without the poison accelerating the curse, the transformations were shorter, less violent, more controlled. Draven was starting to remember what happened in beast form, starting to guide the rage instead of drowning in it. Selene was there every night, talking him through it, anchoring him to humanity. And slowly, impossibly, they found a rhythm. The curse wasn't cured, would probably never be cured, but it was managed, survived, turned into something they could live with instead of something that controlled their lives. 2 months after the coup attempt, Draven called Selene to his private chambers. Not the reinforced room where transformations happened, not the throne room where politics were played, his actual living quarters, the place where kings were supposed to be human. She found him standing at the window, looking out over the capital. The city lights sparkled in the darkness, 10 million lives that depended on the decisions made in this palace. It should have looked beautiful. Instead, it looked heavy. "You wanted to see me." Selene kept her voice neutral, not sure what this meeting was about. Draven turned to face her. He looked better than he had in months. The shadows under his eyes were lighter. His hands were steady. The man was winning against the monster, one night at a time. "I've been thinking about succession." His voice was careful. "About what happens when the curse finally wins, when I can't come back." Selene's chest tightened. "We don't know that'll happen. You're getting stronger, more controlled. For now. But we both know I'm on borrowed time." Draven moved closer. "The physicians say I might have 2 years, maybe 5 if we're lucky. But eventually, the curse will take me permanently. And when it does, the Empire needs stability. You want to name an heir. I want to build something that survives me." Draven's eyes were intense. An empire that doesn't fracture the second the king dies. Laws that protect people from the kind of betrayal I faced. Systems that work whether the ruler is cursed or not. That's a good plan. Selene didn't know where this was going. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to stay, not just for the transformations, not just as the woman who saved me." Draven's voice dropped. "I need you as my queen." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Selene's mind went blank for 3 full seconds before the implications crashed down on her. "Draven, I can't. I'm nobody. A minor noble from a disgraced house. The court would never accept. The court will accept what I tell them to accept." Draven's expression was fierce. "You've proven your loyalty, your courage, your ability to stand beside me when everyone else was planning my funeral. That's worth more than bloodlines or political alliances. Marriage is political. Always. You should be choosing someone who brings you resources or territory or strengthens your hold on power. I'm choosing someone who sees me as human instead of monster." Draven stepped closer. "Someone who walks into hell every night because she believes I'm worth saving. If that's not a foundation for ruling together, I don't know what is." Selene's throat felt tight. She wanted to say yes, wanted to grab onto what he was offering with both hands and never let go. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through weeks of palace intrigue, was screaming warnings. "What happens when you die?" She forced the words out. "When the curse takes you permanently. I'll be a queen with no power base, no military support, and a court full of people who resent that I wasn't born into the right family. They'll tear me apart the second you're gone. Then we build something stronger before I die." Draven's voice was urgent. "We reform succession laws. Make sure power can't be seized just because the king falls. Create a council with real authority that can govern during transitions. I have time, Selene. Maybe not much, but enough to build a structure that protects you after I'm gone. You're planning your own death. I'm planning for reality." Draven's hands came up, framing her face gently. "I'm dying. Have been dying for 10 years. The curse might give me 5 more if I'm lucky. I can spend those years alone, holding everyone at arm's length because getting close means they'll hurt when I'm gone. Or I can spend them with someone who makes me want to fight for every single day." Selene's eyes burned. She told herself not to get attached, told herself this was temporary, that saving the king didn't mean anything beyond doing the right thing.
But standing here now, feeling his hands on her face and seeing the desperate hope in his eyes, she realized she'd failed completely at staying detached. She'd fallen for the monster who was learning to be human again. Say yes. Draven's voice was rough. Let me have something good before the end. Let me build something that lasts even when I don't. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was to walk away before she got hurt worse than she already was. The logical answer was that queens needed political support and royal bloodlines and all the things she didn't have. But Celine had never been particularly good at smart or safe or logical. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. On one condition. Anything. You stop talking like you're already dead. Celine's voice hardened. We fight for 5 years. 10, 20 if we can manage it. We build the empire you want to leave behind, but we also live. Actually live, not just survive. Draven's smile was the most genuine thing she'd seen from him, small and real and almost broken with relief. Deal. He kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle or romantic or any of the things ballads promised. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like survival, like two people who'd fought through hell to reach each other and weren't letting go for anything. When they finally pulled apart, Celine was breathless, and Draven looked more alive than she'd ever seen him. The court's going to lose their minds. She managed a shaky laugh. Let them. Draven's expression was determined. I've spent my entire reign making decisions based on what was politically smart. Time to make one based on what's actually right. Posk. The coronation of Queen Celine Viral happened 3 months later, in a ceremony that managed to be both ostentatious and oddly intimate. The court attended because refusing would have been treason, but Celine could feel their judgment, their resentment, their barely concealed hope that she'd fail and prove that common nobles didn't belong on thrones. She ignored all of it. Let them whisper, let them scheme. She'd survived assassination attempts and palace coups. Court gossip was nothing. What mattered was the man standing beside her, human and present and fighting every day to stay that way. What mattered was the empire they were building together. One that valued loyalty over bloodlines, one that protected the vulnerable instead of just the powerful. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving politics ever was. But it was better, stronger, more honest than what had come before. The transformations continued. Some nights were worse than others. But Draven never lost complete control again. Never woke up covered in innocent blood. The curse was still there, still eating away at his humanity one piece at a time. But it was slow. Manageable, survivable in the way chronic pain was survivable instead of terminal. They had time, not infinite, not guaranteed, but more than anyone had expected. Celine spent her days learning to rule, listening to petitions, making decisions about trade routes and military deployments and all the 1,000 details that kept an empire functioning. It was exhausting, often boring, occasionally terrifying when she had to pass judgment on matters that affected thousands of lives. But she had Draven beside her, had Corwin offering advice, had a small but growing circle of advisors who respected competence more than pedigree. And slowly, painfully, she was earning the court's grudging acceptance, if not their love. 2 years into her reign, she realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Power wasn't about being born into the right family, or wielding the biggest sword, or inspiring the most fear. Power was about showing up every day and doing the work even when it was hard. About making decisions knowing some people would hate you for them. About standing beside people who were broken and helping them find pieces of themselves worth saving. That's what Draven had taught her, even if he'd done it accidentally while fighting for his own survival. That strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up after you'd been knocked down. About refusing to let the worst parts of yourself win just because winning would be easier than fighting. She thought about Malric sometimes. Wondered if he was still alive in the northern wastelands, or if exile had killed him, like it killed most people who weren't prepared for the brutality of survival outside the Empire's borders. Part of her hoped he'd found peace. Another part hoped he was suffering the way he'd made Draven suffer. Mostly she just hoped he'd learned something. That betrayal and ambition and the willingness to destroy others for personal gain always led to the same ending. Alone. Bitter. Exiled from everything that mattered. But that wasn't her story anymore. Her story was about the woman who'd looked at a dying king and seen someone worth saving, who'd walked into darkness every night because courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was showing up despite it. who'd helped rebuild an empire from the inside out by refusing to accept that power had to mean cruelty. 5 years after the coup, Draven called his council together for an announcement. Selene stood beside his throne, watching nobles who'd spent half a decade waiting for the king to finally lose control, watching them realize that the monster they'd feared had learned to be human in ways that made him more dangerous, not less, because humans could be strategic, could plan, could build things that outlasted their own mortality. The curse is permanent, Draven's voice carried across the chamber. I will never be cured, but I've learned to manage it, control it, turn it into something I use instead of something that uses me. With Queen Selene's help, I've survived longer than any Alpha King in 7 generations, and I intend to survive longer still. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm announcing reforms to succession law. When I die, power will not automatically pass to blood relatives. It will pass to whoever has been designated as heir through merit and proven leadership. The crown serves the empire, not the other way around. And anyone who thinks they can seize power through force or conspiracy will find themselves facing laws that protect stability over ambition. The nobles shifted uneasily. This was revolutionary, threatening. It meant the old rules didn't apply anymore, that being born into the right family wasn't enough. You had to earn your place, prove yourself, serve something bigger than personal gain. Selene watched them calculate angles and alliances and how this affected their own houses. Watched them realize that the empire had changed while they'd been busy waiting for it to collapse. Draven looked at her then, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, pride, the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd survived long enough to build something that might actually last. That night, in the reinforced chamber where transformations happened, Draven shifted with the familiar pain that never quite got easier. But Selene was there, like she'd been there every night for 5 years, and when his eyes turned gold and the beast pushed toward the surface, her voice cut through the rage and pulled him back. Every single time. Because that's what love looked like in the real world. Not grand gestures or perfect moments. Just showing up, being present, holding on to someone while they fought their own demons and refusing to let go even when letting go would be easier. They had years ahead of them, maybe a decade if luck held, maybe more if the curse continued to slow its progression. And when the end finally came, when Draven lost his final battle and the beast took over permanently, Selene would be there for that too. But that was tomorrow's problem. Maybe next year's. Maybe a lifetime away. Tonight, they had each other. Had an empire that was slowly learning to value survival over conquest. Had proof that even the most broken things could be repaired if you were willing to do the work. And as Draven's transformation reversed and he collapsed into her arms, human again, exhausted again, but alive again, Selene held him close and thought about the girl she'd been in that throne room 5 years ago. The one who'd stepped forward to defend a servant and accidentally changed the course of history. That girl had been terrified, reckless, operating on instinct and desperate courage with no plan beyond doing the right thing. This woman was still terrified sometimes, still took risks that made sense only in hindsight, but she'd learned something crucial along the way. Power wasn't something you were born with. It was something you earned by showing up for the people who needed you most, by standing beside the broken and the damned and the dying and saying, I see you, and you're worth fighting for, and I'm not leaving. That was the empire they were building. One person at a time, one decision at a time. One night in a reinforced chamber where a queen held a king and reminded him he was still human underneath the curse. And if that wasn't worth dying for, Selene didn't know what was. But she didn't plan on dying anytime soon. She planned on living. Fierce and difficult and real. And that made all the difference.